Your Todd is such a great guy, handsome and athletic, with a good job. And then he gets involved with some. Jane awoke at 6 a.m. to the ringing of her alarm clock. Outside the window, she could see glimpses of the gray September dawn. The day promised to be clear and sunny, which was a good thing. The pictures would turn out beautiful. Thinking about the upcoming event, Jane became excited again. The wedding of Todd's only son, as if he had been a child only a short time ago. Only yesterday he was being packed off to first grade, and now he was all grown up and had decided to start a family. Jane was excited, very excited, but it was a pleasant excitement. Of course, she wanted this day to go perfectly. The woman felt responsible, because the preparation for the holiday was almost entirely on her shoulders, because Susan, Todd's fiancée, was an orphan. Jane's co-workers had their own opinions on the matter. No family, no tribe. Nancy, the department head, shook her head. She had once tried to introduce Todd to her daughter Ashley, but things hadn't worked out right from the start, much to Nancy's disappointment. Susan is a wonderful girl, Jane objected at the time, and it was true. She was a simple, modest girl who immediately appealed to both Jane and her husband John. Well-mannered, alert, sensitive, and what loving eyes she looked at their son. That's the most important thing. With all this, Susan was a real beauty, huge emerald eyes, long, shiny brown hair, perfect figure. Jane still remembered the night Todd had brought her to meet her parents. By then, he had already announced that he had proposed to Susan. It was unexpected, because Jane knew her son was seeing someone, but he hadn't told them the details of the affair. One evening, Todd unexpectedly stopped by his parents' house after work. He looked worried. "What's wrong?" Jane asked anxiously. "Something happened," Todd smiled. "I proposed to the most wonderful girl in the world, and you should know that." "Congratulations." John held out his hand to his son, looking a little puzzled but happy. The news took Jane's breath away. "Who is she?" finally asked the astonished mother. "Her name is Susan. We met by chance. She came to our office to pick up some documents. I saw her and immediately realized that I had to meet her. It was like I'd known her for a long time." You could see from Todd's face that he was truly in love. He lit up when he said her name. And the mysterious Susan? I wondered if she felt the same way about Todd. "Tell me about her," Jane asked. "We don't know anything about this girl who will soon join our family." "That's why I'm here," Todd replied. "We'll come over Friday night to meet you and discuss the details of the wedding." I wanted to break the news in person instead of over the phone. "Great." John was excited. "I can't wait to see your bride." Jane was very nervous about the upcoming meeting. What if they didn't like Susan or disappointed her? What if they couldn't find common ground with the girl? What then? Jane was confused, cooked her specialty, tweaked salads, and even sent her husband to a distant store for elite cheese for cutting. The table turned out wonderful, beautiful, delicious, rich. Susan will immediately realize that she was expected, prepared for her arrival, and Todd would appreciate it. Besides, cooking distracted her, calmed her, made her feel that everything was under control. Finally, the doorbell rang. Jane and John looked at each other. They were both very nervous about meeting Susan. Todd appeared on the doorstep, cheerful, smiling. He was holding a cake from Jane's favorite cake shop. Behind his shoulders, a girl was shuffling from foot to foot, tall, thin, very sweet and touching. Jane took an instant liking to her. She was afraid. She was afraid to meet a bold, haughty look and see a bore in a girl. There's a lot of them nowadays. It's the fashion, isn't it? But Susan was different. Translucent, airy creature with huge eyes framed by long eyelashes, gentle voice, smooth movements, charming smile. Such modesty and restraint with great external data today a rarity. A real treasure. And Susan was also sincerely in love with Todd. Jane noticed that right away. The girl looked at him so much that there was no doubt. The young people were made for each other. Then everyone sat at the table. Jane, trying to diffuse the situation, at first led a conversation on some distracted topics. She wanted Susan to loosen up a little, to feel comfortable. John helped his wife as much as he could, joked, complimented her, told her funny stories from Todd's childhood. Usually the head of the family was a little wordy, but here he tried. Todd did not let the bride's palm out of his hand, supported the girl, showed that he was near.
"Will you tell me a little about yourself?" Jane finally asked. She was curious to know something about the girl who had won her son.
I don't know where to begin. Susan smiled. I work as an accountant at a drilling equipment factory and live alone in my apartment. It's very small, but it's my own. And that's about it, I guess. The girl lowered her eyes in embarrassment. She's modest and doesn't talk about the fact that she's already a chief accountant at such a young age, Todd added. Well done, John praised. It's really quite an accomplishment.
And your parents? Jane continued. I think we should get to know them, discuss the details of the wedding, and get to know each other better. We're going to be relatives soon, which I'm very happy about.
Yes, they're not here, Susan answered, blushing for some reason. Jane suddenly felt most awkward. At first, she did not understand the meaning of the girl's words, and when she did, she was ready to fall to the ground in shame for her question. Susan is an orphan, Todd explained. She grew up in an orphanage. Why didn't you say so before? Jane looked at her son sternly. I wouldn't have asked such tactless questions. It's all right, Susan smiled. I'm not worried about it at all. I don't even remember them. So the only thing I was afraid of was that you wouldn't like an orphan bride. That's why I've been avoiding the subject. You what? Todd's parents exclaimed in unison. It doesn't matter at all, added Jane. It's the first time I've met such a wonderful girl. I'm very glad my son will have such a wife. I told you so. Todd smiled at Susan. I told you they were good. The girl nodded her head. After the news about Susan's parents, Jane and John received another startling piece of news. We're having a baby soon, Todd announced. You're going to be grandparents. Warmth developing throughout her body and goosebumps running down her back were the first things Jane felt when she heard her son's words. John seemed to be experiencing similar sensations. Jane looked at Susan and Todd and a smile spread across her face. Then we should do the wedding as soon as possible, she decided. As long as the belly wasn't showing. Susan, what kind of dress do you want? Pure white or ivory? I think they're just the thing to do at the moment. As the young people left, Jane even cried a little out of emotion. She's going to be a grandmother very soon. It would take some getting used to. Of course, in the long run, she saw herself surrounded by grandchildren, but she did not think that this wonderful event would happen so soon. Her imagination was already drawing bright, sunny pictures. Here she is walking with her grandson by the hand on the Christmas tree. The boy is wearing a cute white bunny costume, or Jane is sitting in a cafe with a beautiful little girl. The little girl is wiggling her feet and scooping ice cream. Or maybe Susan and Todd will even have twins. They've had twins in their family, so it's possible. The fact that Susan was an orphan didn't bother Jane at all. She had once dreamed of a very different daughter-in-law, a girl from a wealthy family, the daughter of wealthy parents. But Susan had won her over. And she herself seemed so gentle, so good. What luck that this sweet girl met on Todd's way, and he was able to see her as a treasure. That first night, when Todd introduced his fiancée to his parents, Jane dialed her best friend Amber's number almost immediately after they left. She just had to share the incredible news with her. Amber and Jane had grown up side by side. Their parents lived next door to each other, so the girls knew each other from the time they were little and spent a lot of time together. Amber's parents and Jane's parents took turns looking after the girls. Both girls felt at home in each other's apartments. When the time came, the girlfriends went to school. Of course, they ended up in the same class. Amber turned out to be good at math. Jane, on the other hand, showed an aptitude for the humanities. It was as if the girls complemented each other. Amber explained theorems and problems to her friend, and the latter, in turn, helped her write essays. Jane didn't remember that she and Amber had ever had a serious argument. Arguments, yes, especially when they were teenagers. Sometimes they'd even fought, but they'd always made up almost immediately. The girls couldn't be without each other. Amber and Jane were the only children in their families and considered each other sisters. Neighbors said that childhood friendships rarely last a lifetime, especially female friendships, and they even joked that the friends would someday fight over some boy, having fallen in love with the same boy at the same time. And that would be the end of the warm relationship. But those prophecies didn't come true. Amber and Jane liked very different guys. Amber married first, to a fun-loving classmate named Charlie. He was never boring. He was always surrounded by a crowd of people. Charlie wittily joked, masterfully played the guitar, sang well. He literally radiated optimism and self-confidence. That was attractive. But the husband, Charlie, was not very good. He did nothing at all around the house, considered household chores not a man's job. Amber had to wash, clean, cook, even iron her husband's clothes and clean his shoes. In general, to take care of a grown man. At the same time, the wife earned much more than her husband. The same, not wanting to exert himself, worked in the bakery as a driver. The work is easy, not dusty. The day is free, but the pay is low. But Amber was so in love with Charlie that she ignored the obvious and courted him with pleasure. But Jane felt bad for her friend. And then Amber and Charlie had a daughter, Emma. Jane still remembered how she felt the first time she held her friend's baby in her arms. She had never seen an infant so close before. The baby was sleeping soundly with her eyes closed. She was so incredible. Chubby cheeks, long eyelashes, like a toy. Jane whispered, gently rocking the miracle in her arms, "Aren't you a mom already?" Amber smiled. "I can't believe it. I've changed in some subtle way since giving birth. I've become even more beautiful, even more feminine. Ever since Jane first saw Emma, she has dreamed of having a child of her own." The girl took great pleasure in taking care of the baby, watching her grow up, become more independent, show character. It was so interesting. Soon married, and Jane. Her chosen one was John, a childhood friend. They had never noticed each other before, just saying hello if they happened to cross paths. One day they met at a college party and got to talking. It turned out that they had a lot in common. Jane wanted the evening to last forever. Apparently John wanted the same thing. Anyway, they left the party together and never parted again. John was different from Charlie, more reserved, less flamboyant, a little modest, but reliable, loving, caring. With him, Jane felt as if she were behind a stone wall. Judicious, calm, stubbornly going to his goal. John always knew what he wanted and achieved it. With a man like that, you didn't have to worry about the future. As soon as she realized that she was expecting a child, Jane immediately told Amber the happy news. At that moment, only Anne and John knew about it. Even the future grandparents didn't know yet. But Jane couldn't hide such joy from Amber. "That's great," said Amber, genuinely happy for her friend. "You have no idea how great it is. I mean, Charlie and I are going to have a baby soon, too. We're going to have a second one."
Jane shrieked with joy. This was something she'd never dreamed of. She and Amber were expecting babies at the same time and would have them at about the same time. The due dates were almost identical. "And then we'll walk around with strollers, sharing news and advice," Jane said. "What if we have girls born? Then they'll be friends, just like us. That would be absolutely perfect."
"Really, Charlie's dreaming of a son," Amber smiled. "He already has a daughter." Jane and Amber were born in March. Jane was the first to give birth, and she gave birth to a beautiful boy, healthy, strong, and handsome. The young mother was overjoyed. She could not believe for a long time that this wonderful baby, her son. About a week later, Amber went into labor in the hospital. She had a baby girl. "Congratulations," Jane shouted into her friend's cell phone. Amber had called from the ward herself to share her joy. Jane held the phone with one hand, the other holding her young son, who was watching his mother intently. "Thank you," Amber answered. Her voice sounded kind of sad. "Why are you so sad?" Jane wondered. "Are you upset that the girl is second?" "No, that's not it." "What is it then?" Jane was genuinely worried. "Is there something wrong with the girl?"
"She has some kind of growth behind her ear, like a vascular hemangioma. The doctors say we have to remove it, or it might grow. We'll have to operate."
"Well, they'll remove the growth and forget about it," Jane tried to cheer Amber up. "The important thing is that she's otherwise fine." "Yeah, sure, she'll be fine." Amber named her youngest daughter Ellie. She had read somewhere that the name had a strong energy. Amber wanted her little girl to conquer her ailment. She believed that the girl would need her strength. Little Ellie was operated on when she was 3 months old. The growth was removed behind her ear. The girl was left with a small scar in the shape of a 5-pointed star. It was red and quite bright, but doctors said that in time the scar will become almost invisible. True, it's unlikely to dissolve, but if the girl wanted to, she could have plastic surgery later. Ellie turned out to be a very troubled child. Perhaps it was the surgery and the anesthesia that caused this effect. But it is more likely that the girl simply felt the tense atmosphere in the family, hence the frequent crying. John did not help his wife with the children in the house. On the contrary, he also reproached Amber that she does not have time for anything and almost does not pay attention to him. Amber was torn between two small daughters, one of whom was unwell. She didn't sleep much at night because Ellie was cranky, and she was trying to work part-time because John's tiny salary was woefully inadequate. And then Charlie and Amber had a big disaster that no one would wish on anyone. Amber blamed herself. Her husband blamed her too. And no matter how much Jane said it was just a tragic coincidence, her friend continued to blame only herself. Tragedy and guilt changed Amber forever. She used to be a smiling, cheerful woman, full of strength and energy, able to find positive aspects in everything. Jane always tried to adopt her friend's optimism and cheerfulness, and Amber was a good example of that. After what had happened, Amber had become a pale shadow of herself. Guilt suffocated her, made her age prematurely, and of course changed her internally. Nothing seemed to make Amber happy anymore, but nothing seemed to make her sad either. She became indifferent, detached, cold. After a while she learned to smile, but Jane knew it was only an appearance. In fact, her beloved friend was suffering unbearably, just skillfully hiding her feelings from others, so as not to upset them. John had left her for someone else shortly after the incident. Jane understood perfectly well that it would have happened sooner or later anyway. He is such an unserious, superficial man, not at all created for family life. Jane tried to help Amber, to be there for her, to listen, to give in, to hug. She hoped the years would smooth, soften, soothe the pain. But time passed, and Amber did not become the same. On the contrary, after the departure of her grown-up daughter Emma to New York, she gave up a lot, as if she had lost a second daughter, and allowed herself to relax. Emma married in the capital, had children. But even grandchildren didn't restore Amber's zest for life. She still blamed herself for what had happened to her youngest daughter, and every year on Ellie's birthday she bought a pink cake, a color she associated with her baby girl. Now Amber was sick a lot her heart. No body, even the strongest, can withstand so many years of self-torture. To live with such a burden on the soul is incredibly difficult. Now Amber was in the hospital, facing another surgery, which Emma had paid for. Jane felt sorry for Emma and admired her. Emma had lived her entire conscious life next to her mother, who fought with herself every day for the sake of her eldest daughter, realizing that she really needed her mother. Emma grew up strong, independent, sensitive. She became a pillar for her mother. Even though she lived in another city, even from there she managed to take care of Amber's health. Emma had asked her mother to come over many times, but she always refused. "Why don't you move in with your daughter?" Jane wondered. She asked so much. You could help the young people with their grandchildren. It would be a great help, whereas they have to hire a nanny, a stranger. No, Amber shook her head. "I can't be trusted with children. You know that, don't you?" Jane sighed heavily. Of course she knew. Knew what had happened to Amber's youngest daughter. But Jane was still convinced it was nothing more than a tragic coincidence. Too bad it was impossible to convince her friend of that. After learning that she was about to become a grandmother, Jane immediately dialed Amber. But how could she not share such important news with her best friend? She answered quickly. The phone was probably in the pocket of her hospital gown. "Congratulations," Amber said. "That's great, Todd. He's going to be a wonderful father to Ethan." "It's all so sudden, I'm shocked." Jane agreed. He hadn't shared with us what was going on in his personal life. Just the day before yesterday he told us that he proposed to his girlfriend. And today they came, and with such news. Children are happiness. Fragile, defenseless happiness, Amber said. The friends talked some more. Jane told Amber about her future daughter-in-law, sharing how she liked this quiet, modest girl. "She's wonderful. There's probably no one like her anymore. Todd is very lucky to have her. We're happy for him. He's a decent young man and he deserves this happiness." Jane got out of bed. She hadn't slept much the night before, thinking about the day ahead. Here it was, the wedding. Already today the dining room had been ordered. The menu had been drawn up. The decorator should arrive at the hall in a few hours to decorate it to taste. The girl chose to decorate in white and gold colors. She clearly had exquisite taste during the preparations for the wedding. Jane made sure of that. And what kind of dress did they find for the bride? She thought. It was just Susan and I who picked out the outfits together. What a surprise it will be for Todd. Susan would look like a Hollywood actress in her wedding dress today, although on such a figure, of course. Everything fits perfectly. Preparations for the celebration brought her daughter-in-law and mother-in-law closer together. Susan finally stopped being shy of Jane. They even switched to you. Jane marveled that the closer she got to know Susan, the more she liked her. And Susan seemed to like her, too. And so today is day X. John is still asleep. He's not feeling very excited about the big day. He's more excited about becoming a grandfather. He's already bought toys, bought and hidden in his closet, his wife thinks. Doesn't notice anything. But Jane, of course, has noticed. And she felt warm and happy at the sight of those boxes. I bet Todd's still asleep, too. He's like his father in that way, quiet, but Susan is definitely up and about. Her hairdresser will be here in an hour. And Susan's friends, who spent the night at her place on the eve of the wedding, are probably decorating the entrance. The girls decided to have an old-fashioned bride purchase ceremony. Todd had managed to book the best videographer and photographer in town, so the photos would be gorgeous. At least that's what the son assured everyone. That's good. It'll be memorable. And also the wedding will be conducted by some very fashionable host. A friend of the groom's, Todd's former classmate Jake, got him for the newlyweds. He's a good guy, businesslike. Jane went into the kitchen and poured herself a cup of coffee. Strong, flavorful, steaming. She has a little more time to sit in silence and think, dream. Todd, my Todd, has grown up so fast, she thought. Too bad Amber won't be at the wedding. She had complications from her surgery, and her daughter got her into a rehab center. A friend broke the disturbing news just 2 days before the wedding, calling from the hospital. I'm sorry I can't make it to Todd's wedding, she sighed. I'd dreamed of it once. I thought Ellie was going to be his bride. Remember when we used to dream about it? When they were on the carpet, trying to take each other's rattles? I do, Jane smiled. How can you forget such a thing? The bride and groom hadn't even learned to sit up yet. And we were making such grand plans. I'll congratulate Todd when I get out of the hospital, Amber promised. And I'd love to see his fiancée. Can you send me pictures of the wedding? At least I'd like to see some of the young people. Jane knew that Amber felt warmly for Todd and wished him happiness. Jane felt the same way about her friend's daughter, Emma. And then the wedding day swirled into a whirlwind of colorful events. First, John and Jane arrived at their son's apartment. Near the entrance, Todd's friends were busily decorating cars and preparing the wedding cortege. The apartment itself was in a state of pre-wedding commotion. The groom looked gorgeous, without false modesty. Jane admired with her son. Tall, trim, a real beauty. And the bride to match him. What beautiful children this couple will have. They shouldn't stop at one baby. Then there was the redemption. Bridesmaids tried, invented for the groom and his friends contests. Guys told poems about them, danced, sang ditties, solved riddles. In general, young people were having a lot of fun, and adults looked at it and rejoiced. Finally, the moment came when the happy groom and the beautiful bride came out of the entrance. The guests greeted them with loud applause. Someone showered the couple with rose petals. It all looked beautiful and very touching. Then there was a solemn registration in the registry office. After the obligatory promenade through the memorable places of the city, with photographer and videographer. And finally, the newlyweds and accompanying guests appeared in the dining room. The festive program began. The host turned out to be wonderful. The guests had fun from the heart. No one was not bored. By the middle of the evening, Jane suddenly felt tired, probably overexcited. She had been on her feet since early morning. The woman went out into the courtyard. It was quiet, peaceful, cozy. She sat down on a bench and pressed her fingers on her temples. She was beginning to get a headache. It was not enough to spoil the young people's holiday with her sour look. And the wedding? The wedding had indeed been perfect, just as Jane had hoped. We did it, she heard a voice say. Are you not feeling well? Jane turned around. Susan was standing next to her. No, I'm fine. I just felt a little dizzy. It'll pass. Should I ask the receptionist for a pill? There was so much concern in that girl's voice. I'll be right back. No, I feel better, really, Jane smiled. What a caring, sensitive daughter-in-law she had. Worried about her mother-in-law, worried. "And I see you've gone pale and left the hall," said Susan. "So I followed. You never know." "Thank you. I'm fine." Jane admired the beautiful bride again. It was the first time she had seen Susan with her hair like that. She usually left her hair loose. Susan was incredibly well suited to a smooth style. It made more noticeable the correct features of the face, the grace of the girl's neck and shoulders. And suddenly Jane noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small detail that may have meant nothing, but it couldn't have been a coincidence. Susan's long hair used to cover this spot. Now her locks were pulled back into a high updo. That's why Jane noticed it. The woman immediately felt as if she had been thrown back more than 20 years. She saw herself as a young and inexperienced mother, and baby Todd in a playpen in the kitchen. Jane was just preparing her son's semolina when the bell rang. The woman went out into the hallway, where there was a landline phone, a relic of the past that was now a thing of the past. It was, of course, kind of impossible. But Jane immediately thought that the ringing of the phone sounded alarming. It sounded shrill. The woman's heart twitched. She knew instinctively that something was wrong. Indeed, the phone was ringing with sobs that made her blood run cold. It was Amber. She was roaring in her voice, trying to say something, but she couldn't. Her friend couldn't even inhale properly, let alone say a word. "Amber, what? What happened?" Jane asked, cold with horror. She wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Something very bad had happened. But until her friend told her the truth, she could only hope that it was something minor. Maybe she'd had another fight with Charlie, or maybe she'd finally found out he had a mistress. There were people in Amber's apartment. Jane could hear their voices through her friend's sobs. The men were talking quietly about something. "Amber, what?" Jane repeated for the umpteenth time. Amber clutched the receiver tightly, her knuckles white and sweat beading on her forehead. Finally she spoke. "Jane, I lost her. I lost her, okay? Please come over." "Yes, I will. Hang on." Jane hung up the phone and slid down the wall. Ellie was a smiling, chubby-cheeked, big-eyed baby, a future beauty. That's what everyone who saw the baby said. Jane held her in her arms. Only yesterday, the baby looked perfectly healthy, trying to crawl, smiling with a toothless mouth. What could have happened? What do you mean, lost? An icy fear gripped Jane's heart. She was scared to even think about what had happened to the girl. What about Amber now? It hurt terribly. It is necessary to urgently go to a friend, to support, to embrace, to know how to help, to understand what happened. Jane quickly packed, dressed little Todd, called a cab. She took the baby to her parents, explained that she had to go to Amber's house urgently. She was in trouble with her youngest daughter. The mother didn't ask any questions, but there was anxiety in her eyes. She'd known Amber since she was a child and was worried about her. Jane froze in front of her friend's door, not daring to press the bell. There were people in the apartment. She could hear them walking and talking. Then she heard Amber sobbing, more restrained than when the bell had rung, but distinct, bitter, pitiful. Finally, Jane made up her mind and rang the bell. Amber opened, and there in her arms sat Emma, a frightened little girl, just turned 4. The girl hugged her mother tightly around the neck, and when she saw Jane, she was happy and smiled weakly. There were policemen in the apartment, 2 uniformed men sitting at the kitchen table, asking Charlie something. He was bowing his head, answering one-word answers, looking confused, frightened, seeming barely able to hold back tears. Charlie barely glanced at Jane as she entered, didn't even nod, went back to talking to the law. "Let's go," Amber called softly and went into the living room, the room farthest from the front door. Jane hurried after her, desperately hoping to hear Ellie crying. Maybe Amber had misunderstood somehow. Or maybe she'd misunderstood herself. Maybe it wasn't all that scary. Though there was no way Jane could explain it in front of the police officers. Amber slumped helplessly in her chair. Emma stayed glued to her mother's side. Jane thought later that the girl had intuitively guessed, that in that terrible moment was the only thing keeping Amber on this earth. Jane sat down next to her on the armrest, put her arm around her friend. She took a deep breath and began her story. "I lost Ellie. It's my fault. So guilty. If anything happened to her, I'd never forgive myself. It turned out that the night before, Ellie hadn't slept much the night before, seemingly worried about a scar behind her ear from a recent adenoid surgery. She cried all the time, Amber remembered. I rocked her in my arms, not sleeping, of course. The young mother tried to keep her daughter from screaming and disturbing the sleep of Charlie, who had to go to work in the morning. Ellie was silent only in her mother's arms. As soon as she was put in the crib, she immediately began to scream loudly and pitifully. Only in the morning did the baby doze off. But I didn't lie down any longer. Charlie was getting up soon, and I had to make him breakfast, and Emma would be up in half an hour. I knew that if I touched my head to the pillow, I would fall into a deep, dreamless sleep. I wanted to make it to lunch before Ellie was due for her afternoon nap, so I could rest with her, Amber explained, staring at the wall with tear-stained, unseeing eyes. Jane didn't rush her friend, though she was eager to find out what had happened to Ellie. Jane had grown fond of the girl, attached to her with all her soul. She didn't even want to think about the fact that something irreparable had happened to her. Sticky, nasty goosebumps ran down Jane's back. A strange chill settled in her stomach, blood pounding in her ears. Amber walked her husband Todd to work. Then, taking advantage of Ellie's sleep, she'd taken Emma to daycare. Why didn't Charlie do it? Jane asked a reasonable question. He couldn't help but see the state you were in. Wouldn't it be hard to take a child to daycare before work? Amber shrugged. It had been that way in their family for a long time. Charlie only worked and partied with friends, and Amber took care of the house, the household chores, and the children. Her spouse sincerely believed that the money he brought in from work each month was a sufficient contribution to the family. The rest of the worries did not concern him. When I got home from daycare, Ellie was already waking up, Amber continued. She was getting cranky again, crying, begging to be held. Maybe it was the wound behind her ear, maybe something else. Teeth, Jane said. She must be teething. Ethan's the same way. He doesn't sleep much, he's always begging to be held. Maybe it's teething, Amber whispered. My poor girl. Where's she now? Maybe she's sick, but there's no one to hold her and comfort her. Tell me what's the matter. Jane begged. I can't wait any longer. I need to know what happened to Ellie. Didn't I tell you? Amber wondered, rocking Emma in her arms. I told you I lost her. You lost her? Lost her. Jane couldn't believe her ears. Lost her, Amber said louder and louder with each word. Tears came to her eyes. Her voice was ringing. By some incredible effort of will, the woman pulled herself together and continued the story. Ellie was cranky again, and I made the only decision that seemed right to me at the time. I went outside with my daughter. In the fresh air, the little girl always calmed down. The surrounding world mesmerized the girl. She looked around curiously, listened to the sounds, and immediately forgot about small troubles like a scar and cutting teeth. And so it was this time. Amber was sitting on a park bench, rocking her stroller. Ellie lay on the mattress, scrutinizing the world around her. She was no longer crying, no longer screaming. On the contrary, the girl was smiling charmingly, as if this terrible sleepless night had never happened. Amber relaxed a little. It was early September. The weather was summer-like, and the flower beds in the park were blooming with large, bright colors. It was beautiful, very beautiful. The young mother was suddenly at peace. She felt peace and warmth, and did not notice how she dozed off. If only time could go back, Amber sobbed, I would never have sat on that bench. I would have walked with the stroller through the park. But I fell asleep, and now I'll never forgive myself. Amber was exhausted from a long night. She fell asleep. She folded her arms on the side of the stroller, rested her head on them, and felt as if she had fallen somewhere. She thought she had closed her eyes for a moment, but when she opened them, the sun was already high. So it had been at least an hour or more. Amber, of course, immediately looked into the stroller and was stunned. The stroller was empty. On the thin cushion were the rattles from the soother's legs and Ellie's bottle. But the baby was gone. The young mother looked under the stroller in case her daughter had somehow fallen down. But Ellie wasn't there either. Amber felt like she couldn't breathe for fear. Her eyes darkened, and it slowly dawned on her that something terrible, unimaginable, horrible had happened. More than anything, she wanted to take her daughter in her arms and hold her close. The past sleepless night suddenly seemed to the unhappy mother happiness, because she rocked in her arms her warm, native, little baby girl. And now she's gone. Amber was listened to carefully, and several statements were taken. Soon Charlie showed up at the station. He'd gotten a call at work, told him the news, invited him in for questioning. I slept through my own child. Amber shook her head sorrowfully. While I was asleep, someone just took her out of the stroller. And there's no telling what's happening now. And it's all my fault. I'm the only one to blame. Jane sat frozen with fear. Tears were streaming from her eyes, but she didn't notice them. She was scared for Ellie. Jane also felt sorry for Amber. She couldn't even begin to imagine what she was feeling right now. I wasted a little time, Amber continued. Running all over the park, yelling, calling for my girl, asking people. Stupid chicken. I probably would have kept running until tonight if a guy hadn't told me to go to the police. He walked me to the station. He saw the state of mind I was in. I think they suspected us. Amber shook her head. They thought we'd done something to Ellie and made up a story like that. Maybe they still think that. They sent those two over to us. They're interviewing Charlie again. They're making some kind of protocols. Are they looking for Ellie? Jane asked. Yes, they're looking for her everywhere. The investigation is in full swing, Jane said confidently. At that moment she hoped so. Not that she hoped it. The woman knew it would happen. Didn't even allow herself to think otherwise. But Ellie had not been found that day, or the next, or after a week of searching. Hope had all but faded. The uniformed men had told the unhappy mother bluntly that since the search had been fruitless for so long, there wasn't much hope. Amber had turned black and lost weight over the week. Her eyes burned with a feverish fire, and she looked like a mad woman. No wonder her heart was heavy with guilt. Charlie, too, blamed his wife for everything, calling her a lazy, careless cuckoo, constantly reproaching her for sleeping through the baby. One day, when he once again rudely responded to his wife in front of Jane, she could not stand it. If you had helped her a little with the children, this would not have happened. Jane shouted in the face of a surprised Charlie. He had never expected such a turn of events, and had never looked at the situation from any other angle. She was exhausted, falling asleep. If you had taken Emma to the garden, or even if you had gone to work yourself, Ellie would be home right now. Fuck you two witches. Charlie swore angrily and left the apartment, slamming the door loudly. You asshole. Jane shouted after him. He's right, Amber said, rocking back in her chair. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. It's a tragic set of circumstances. Jane hugged her friend, trying not to show her own fear. Then the woman repeated this and similar phrases to Amber many times. It wasn't her fault. It was the circumstances. But without consolation, the mother let her friend's words pass her ears. She immediately decided everything for herself. What happened to the little girl was her fault. And that was it. As time passed, there was no news of Ellie. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air. Even a team from LA came to look for the girl, but even these specialists were powerless. What happened to the little girl? No one could give a clear answer. No trace. No clues. No clue. At that point, Jane realized that was the worst of it. On the other hand, there was still hope, a small chance that Ellie was all right. Charlie couldn't take the strain and left. Ran off to one of his girlfriends that he had so much fun spending his free time with. Amber didn't even notice it. He was gone and gone. Little things like that didn't matter to her right now. Jane came to see her friend every day, hugged her, cried with her. She was just there and helped a little with the household cooking, walking with Emma. John or Jane's mother would stay with Todd during this time. Returning from Amber, Jane first of all immediately pressed her son to her. It turns out to be such a blessing just to be able to kiss and hug your own child. But Amber is deprived of that. Time passed, the search for Ellie continued, but not so actively, of course. The hope for a happy outcome was all but gone. True, Amber was reassured. Investigator Johnson and an older man confidently stated that such little ones are usually taken for a purpose. Chances are your little girl went to some wealthy, childless family. So your daughter is probably much happier than you are. Jane was outraged then. What nonsense is this? Did this man in uniform really think that his words could soothe a mother's heart? But Amber clung to the thought. It seems that she wanted to believe in the investigator's version of events, to believe that her daughter lived in a wealthy family and bathed in love and care, even if not native, but so dreamed of a child's parents. But the guilt and anxiety never went away. All these years Amber lived without knowing what happened to her daughter. Sometimes she painted beautiful pictures of Ellie's life, saw her as the daughter of rich parents, a little spoiled and very happy. But sometimes Amber envisioned very different, darker, sadder, harder scenes of Ellie's life. What Amber certainly never thought about was that her daughter wasn't alive. "She's alive," Amber told Jane. "She's definitely alive. I know it. I can feel it." The unhappy mother knew that her friend would understand her, would not think her crazy. And Jane did understand. Amber was on autopilot, always waiting for Ellie to show up. Hoping for it, even though it had been years since that moment. She scrutinized the faces of the girls who were Ellie's age. What if the daughter was found completely by accident, just met on the street? Amber was sure she would recognize her, even though the last time she had held her daughter in her arms was when she was 6 months old. The presence of her older daughter, Emma, had been a deterrent to Amber then. She confessed to Jane that she'd even considered leaving the world because she couldn't bear to live like that. And the guilt Amber shook her head. "It's my fault." Over time, she recovered outwardly. She worked, raised her daughter, dated a friend, took care of the house, and lived the life of an average woman. But she didn't think about marriage anymore. She didn't think she was worthy of happiness because of what had happened to Ellie. Emma grew up, went to study in New York, found a job, got married, had children. Everything in her life had worked out well. Jane was happy for the girl. Amber seemed to be too. The daughter repeatedly called her mother to her in the capital, even through Jane tried to influence. She asked her to talk to Amber, to explain that there, near her family, she would be easier and more fun. Jane agreed with Emma and tried to convince Amber. At first she made up irrelevant reasons, but then she suddenly confessed. "I keep thinking that if by some miracle Ellie comes home and there's no one there. No, I can't go anywhere. I'm still waiting." Jane sighed heavily, her heart clenched with pain. Her friend had spent her whole life blaming herself. Charlie had been living happily ever after in his 3rd or 4th marriage. Jane had lost count, falling in love, having kids, having fun with his friends. It seems that he has almost forgotten about what happened. The bright events of life displaced the heavy memories. Amber had been slowly destroying herself over the years. Between the eyebrows, deep wrinkles, under the eyes settled thick shadows. The woman was characterized by unnatural thinness, looked much older than her years. But the main thing was her health. She had serious heart problems. She underwent more than one operation. Doctors strongly advised Amber to avoid stress and fill reality with positive emotions. How to do it, if your whole life is one continuous stress? That was a question the doctors couldn't answer. And now, sitting with her son's fiancé John on a bench in the front garden, Jane suddenly remembered the events of more than 20 years ago. As clearly as if it had all happened only yesterday. And that was because she had noticed a small star behind Susan's ear. A tiny, oddly shaped diamond. In Ellie's it was pink and kind of swollen. But the doctors had promised that in time the mark of the surgery would become almost invisible. Jane hadn't noticed the asterisk before. No surprise there. Susan usually left her hair loose. Underneath, of course, nothing was visible. But today the hairdresser had gathered her locks into a beautiful hairdo, and the star was revealed. It was only visible at close range. Was there something wrong with Susan? Jane thought. No, it's fine, she smiled, trying to hide her emotions. It was not enough to embarrass or frighten a girl at her own wedding. What an interesting scar you have on yourself. Just like a star. Where did that come from? Jane asked. I don't remember, Susan shrugged. I think I've always had it. Shall we go and see the guests? Jane nodded with a smile. The rest of the wedding went perfectly. A local youth group performed in front of the guests. People danced merrily to the cheerful tunes. No one wanted to leave. Then there was the traditional wedding cake, followed by a magnificent fireworks display. Jane, however, could think of nothing else but that little star behind Susan's ear. Could it be that Susan is Ellie? Everything fits together. The age, the absence of parents, and most importantly, the oddly shaped scar. It's from a long ago surgery. Amber was so worried that the scarring would harm her daughter's looks. Speaking of looks, Jane looked at Susan with fresh eyes. The girl looks a lot like Charlie. Ellie was Daddy's daughter too. Another coincidence? Or am I just making this up? Charlie turned out to be an unreliable family man and a mean person. But he was handsome. There was no arguing with that. What his big green eyes alone were worth to Susan. Susan's eyes were also big and also green. The closer I looked at the bride, the more I was convinced it was Ellie. I wanted to dial Amber immediately, but I couldn't bother my friend until I knew for sure. She was already having heart problems. What if Jane was wrong? What if she gives Amber false hope, and then it all turns out to be a mistake? Would the poor mother survive such a blow? I mean, she's barely hanging on. In the evening, Jane decided to talk to John about it. Of course, her husband was aware of the story of Amber's daughter. At one time, he also tried to help, looking for some detectives, trying to get a meeting with high-ranking investigators. John was very worried about Amber and Charlie. Jane once even saw her husband crying, rocking Todd in his arms and crying. The woman realized then that her spouse had a real heartache for the missing girl. John listened to his wife very carefully. "It's unbelievable," he said. "I understand, but the scar. I've seen it so many times on Ellie and Susan. It's the same shape. It's exactly the same. Only it's pale, almost invisible. Maybe you're confused. I still had my husband's doubts. It's been so long, you might have forgotten." "I'm not confused," Jane said confidently. "But you shouldn't tell Amber yet anyway." "I know, but what should I do? What should I do?" "Susan seems like a reasonable person," Jane shrugged. "Maybe we should tell her. Her and Todd. And then we'll figure out together how to proceed. It really was an amazing coincidence. It's a wonderful coincidence." The next day, Jane invited the newlyweds to dinner. Todd and Susan arrived at the appointed time. Cheerful, happy. They brought cakes from a nearby candy store and a bouquet of beautiful flowers. Jane didn't know how to start a conversation. The newlyweds were happily sharing their plans with their parents. They were going on a wedding trip. Jane and John had already managed to buy vouchers. Jane admired the family, smiled, and painfully chose words. How to start a difficult conversation. John sat next to his wife and from time to time looked at her meaningfully. Finally, Jane made up her mind, took in more air, and asked Susan, "Do you know nothing at all about your family?" "I'm sorry to ask you this, but I'm not just asking." Susan looked at her mother-in-law in surprise, then sighed and confessed. "I lied to you a little bit the first time I met you. Not out of malice, but it's just embarrassing to admit it. I know a little something about them." Todd didn't seem surprised. Apparently, he was aware of Susan's secret and realized that the girl had a right to her secrets. Jane would never have gotten into her heart under other circumstances, but now she had to know for sure. "I still have an uncle, my father's cousin," Susan said frankly. "He even came to the orphanage sometimes to visit me. And he often told me about my parents." From Uncle Harry, Susan learned that her parents were people who drank heavily. That's what got them both killed. Susan was about 3 years old when she was orphaned. "I remember them a little, as in a fog," admitted the girl. "The voices, the eyes, the hands. Uncle Harry said he wanted to take the girl with him. But who would entrust a small child to a lonely, drunken man?" "Yeah, Susan's only relative drank a lot, too." That's what the uncle told the girl, that her parents hardly looked after her. "If it wasn't for me," he used to say when he came to visit his niece. "If it hadn't been for me, you'd have died in infancy. You know you have a scar behind your ear, don't you? Well, you were the one who was put out by a drunken freak, a friend of your parents, with a cigarette when you were a baby. It's a good thing I happened to walk in on them at that moment. That asshole flew farther than I could see. And your parents. They didn't care at all. They couldn't think straight because of the booze." Susan felt a kind of gratitude and affection for Uncle Harry, for she had no one else. He'd come over sometimes. Sometimes he'd even bring her things. Cheap candy with crumbs all over it. But it didn't matter. The main thing was attention. When Jane heard about the origin of Susan's scar, she gasped. First, with horror. It was frightening to imagine that someone had treated a defenseless infant like that. Secondly, Jane's version of the story was crumbling. So the girl's scars were not of unknown origin and certainly not from surgery. That's a shame. Jane had gotten used to the idea that Susan was Ellie. She envisioned taking a DNA test, getting positive results, and bringing them to Amber. Her friend would be back to her old self, of course, and the unbearably heavy burden would be lifted from her soul. "Why didn't you invite your uncle to the wedding?" John asked. "We would like to meet the only relative of our favorite daughter-in-law." "Uncle Harry." "He was too shy," Susan said, her eyes downcast. "You know what I mean? He's kind and good, but he drinks a lot. And he's very poor. I asked him to come, but his uncle refused. He said he would feel uncomfortable among the guests. But he didn't want to embarrass me with his appearance. Modesty seems to be a family trait. After Susan's story, Jane did not dare to start the conversation, for which she had carefully prepared the day before. When the newlyweds left, John was surprised to ask his wife why she remained silent. I could tell the story myself, of course, he said, but it would be better if you did. Why didn't you ask about the main thing? Why should I now? Why worry the girl for nothing? It's clear it's not Amber. She's a daughter, and she's got an uncle. And the scar doesn't appear to be from the surgery. Are you sure? John squinted at his wife. Are you sure this uncle is telling the truth? We should find out more about him, about this Uncle Harry. I don't know why, but he seems suspicious to me. You're right, Jane agreed. The next time Todd and Susan visited her parents, Jane began to ask her sister-in-law about her uncle. She wanted to learn as much as she could about this character. What does he do for a living? Is he a relative of yours? No one. Susan was embarrassed and even blushed. Then she plucked up courage and confessed he drinks a lot. He can't get a job anywhere. He gets by on odd jobs. Sometimes he helps unload a truck at the store, or digs someone's garden, collects scrap metal and bottles. And since we're family now, I have to be honest with you. Uncle. He's even been in jail for stealing. Now you know everything about me. That's the kind of daughter-in-law you have. Jane put her arms around Susan, pulling her close. Oh, come on, girl. There's no need to be embarrassed. You can't choose your relatives. But he's a good man. He is very good, despite everything, fervently assured Susan's mother-in-law. Kind, considerate. He did not abandon me, visited me. We talk to him sometimes now. Now I work and help him as much as I can to keep him out of trouble. Jane looked at Susan with pity. Poor girl, so young, and she'd been through so much already. Now she finds herself being taken advantage of by an alcoholic uncle. A pure soul, grateful to him only for coming to her orphanage once in a while. If this man wanted to, if he really wanted his niece to do well, he would have gotten smart. He found a job, made repairs in the apartment, and took the child with him. But he did not want to part with the usual way of life, and the girl had to grow up in an orphanage among strangers. What she has achieved in this way, it is only her merit. Does he ask a lot about you? Jane asked. Yes, especially lately, Susan nodded. Really, John interjected. Why don't we meet and get to know each other and talk directly? Uncle won't agree, Susan shook her head. I've already suggested it to him many times. What is he asking? John continued. Just what do you do? Where do you live? Who are your friends? The usual stuff. And yet tell me the address, Uncle, John asked. I have a job that requires assistant forwarders. The pay is good and the work is easy. Any uncle of yours could do it. I think he'd be happy to do it. Would he? Susan was delighted. He needs money for his medicine. I even wanted to take out a loan for him. But if the salary is really good, we can do without it. Oh, sure. Let's go and see him right away, John decided. So they went. On the way, they stopped at the store and picked up some groceries for Susan's only relative. According to her, he was poor and unemployed. The mysterious, modest Uncle Harry lived in an old 5-story building on the outskirts of town. Dilapidated buildings with cracks in the walls, mountains of garbage all around. Jane hadn't realized there were neighborhoods like this left in the city. They walked up to the 5th floor. There was no elevator. Susan opened the shabby door with her own key. Uncle, hello, her voice rang through the apartment. A man in his 50s appeared from the kitchen, slouching, unshaven, wearing knee-high sweatpants and an unclean gray t-shirt. The appearance of the owner corresponded to the situation in the apartment: dirty floors, things falling off the walls, wallpaper peeling off everywhere. Hello, Uncle Harry, he said, looking around at the guests. His gaze was keen, penetrating, intelligent. No, he didn't look like an alcoholic. It was just that this man made an unpleasant impression on Jane. Hello, John stepped forward, extending his hand to the landlord. I'm sorry to drop in unannounced. It's just that we recently found out that you have a relative, and you're kind of in need of a job. And I have a very good offer. What relatives are there? Uncle Harry smiled. It's just the 7th water on the vine. I felt sorry for the girl, that she was alone. So I visited her sometimes. Why are you so modest? Jane entered the conversation. Susan told me a lot about you. Your support was very important to her. Shall we go? Then Uncle Harry suggested, waving his hand toward one of the rooms. Don't call me like I'm treading water. Jane could see that their arrival did not please this Uncle Harry. He visibly tensed when he saw a whole crowd of people near his niece. Papa's work requires assistant forwarders. Susan began to fill her uncle in. I'd love to, but I have a bad back, Jane said, as if he were guilty. Susan began unloading groceries from the bags. The man was embarrassed. Oh, why did you buy so much? I'm embarrassed to take it all, and the conversation flowed. Uncle Harry was embarrassed and seemed afraid to say a word. Though his eyes were keen, attentive, scrutinizing, they in no way corresponded to the image of a shy, simple man, which the man apparently tried with all his might to create. The guests stayed in Uncle Harry's old apartment for about 20 minutes, then returned to John's car. He drove the young ones home. Then an important conversation took place between John and Jane. I find this character even more suspicious now. John shook his head. There's something about him, something unpleasant, repulsive. That's what I thought, too. We need to talk to him again, without Susan and Todd, like we used to right now. John determinedly steered the car toward Uncle Harry's house. The man certainly hadn't expected to see his new in-laws again so soon. Forgot something, he smiled unpleasantly at his guests. Yes, John nodded. We need to talk about Susan's childhood. All right, the man shrugged. Didn't she say anything herself? I'd like to hear the story from you, an adult relative. Suit yourself. Uncle Harry didn't let his guests pass the threshold. He was clearly trying to show that he was uncomfortable with the conversation, and the conversation would be short. Who were her parents? Jane was the first to ask the main question. My cousin's brother Will and his wife Dana. Did they have any other children? They did. First a son was born. He turned out to be sick and didn't live to be 2. Then a little girl named Katie. She had a bad accident. She drowned in the bathtub. Dana almost went to jail. Miraculously managed to prove it wasn't her fault. And last of all, Susan, her parents. They were drinking, Jane clarified. And they were pretty bad at the collar, too. And they had friends like that, laughed her uncle. Are there any pictures of Susan from her childhood left? Pictures of her as a little girl, even before the orphanage? Somewhere. Uncle Harry scratched the back of his head. I'll look at it now. He strode into the room, and from there came the clatter of a closet door. Then some rustling. At last the landlord came out again to the uninvited guests. He held a photograph in his hand. Jane took it carefully. It showed an adorable baby girl in a blue jumpsuit, chubby cheeks. She was lying on a milk-colored ground decorated around the edges with cute little bears. The woman tried to hide her amazement. Instead of gasping in surprise, she smiled, pretending to be smiling at the baby. In reality, her heart was racing. She recognized that plaid. Jane had given it to Ellie for her first month. It was the same one she'd bought for her son. And she had gotten those plaids by accident. They weren't available on the mass market. But her neighbor stewardess just returned from a flight abroad with wonderful goods. Jane bought 2 lovely plaids from her. There was no way such a thing could accidentally end up in the hands of marginalized people. John seemed to have figured it out, too. He didn't usually pay attention to such details, but he knew and remembered the plaid with the bears very well. They still had that plaid to use as a bedding. Tell the truth. Where did your relatives get Susan from? John looked at Uncle Harry directly and calmly. Otherwise, I'm going to have to call the police because something is fishy here. Uncle Harry turned visibly pale, his eyes blazing with anger. He reeked of danger. Jane was even a little frightened. But John, her husband, did not show a shadow of doubt. He looked at the landlord and waited for an answer. The man was confused, but only at first. He quickly pulled himself together. What do you mean, from where? It's the daughter of my brother and his wife. Well, I mean his roommate, Uncle Harry replied. John continued to press his companion with his gaze. He obviously didn't believe a word he said, so he went for broke. Let's be honest, John suggested. We know who Susan is, and we understand how she came into your family. It won't be hard to prove it now. DNA test and everything will be clear. Susan's been wanted all this time. She's still missing. You may not be involved. But if there's an investigation, who knows what details will emerge. If your conscience is clear and you really don't know anything, you have nothing to fear. If you do know something, I strongly advise you to share this information before we go to the police. Because if they do, there's no stopping it. Jane looked at her husband with admiration. He was so determined, and he had put it all so well. Uncle Harry had nowhere to go. The landlord thought for a few moments. He was hesitating, and that in itself suggested that there was something dark going on. Had they found Amber's daughter after all? Jane was still afraid to believe it. Okay, the scowling, unshaven man agreed. I'll tell you, but you have to promise me you won't implicate me. I wasn't involved. But if they start digging, they might drag me in because I'm an ex-convict. They like to pin things on people like me. We promise, Jane said immediately. It doesn't matter now, as long as we get Susan's story and find out if she's really Amber's daughter. Ben, Uncle Harry's cousin, and his other half, Rose, lived in a cramped little 2-room apartment that had been inherited from their dead grandmother. There were many similarities between the residents. Both did not work, liked partying, noisy company, avoided responsibility and drank heavily. Both had an inherited taste for booze. Both Rose and Ben were raised in broken homes, where mothers abused and neglected their children and changed suitors like gloves. Rose and Ben carried the family model learned in childhood into their adult lives. The only difference was the surprisingly strong relationship between them. Perhaps it was even love. No, from time to time Rose and Ben quarreled, even fought. But a good fight is a good fight. Harry, Ben's cousin, was a frequent visitor to their family nest. Children were born before his eyes, couples came and went. Rose and Ben's lifestyle did not dispose to happy, healthy parenthood. The couple's first son was born profoundly disabled. In the maternity hospital even advised to give him to a boarding school. But someone told Rose that the state allocates good money for such children. And the new mother took the baby home. Why? Not a bad way to make money. The boy needed care and constant medical supervision. All this, of course, the grief-stricken parents could not give their unfortunate son. That's why he died soon after his first birthday. The young parents did not grieve for long. They were already expecting a second child. Lily was born surprisingly healthy and strong. It could be considered a miracle, considering that her mother was well behind the collar during the whole pregnancy. There were no big allowances for a healthy baby. But Rose and Ben seemed to love their little girl. They just couldn't take care of the baby. One day Harry went to visit his brother and found Charlie and Rose in a panic. Both were drunk, but still not so drunk that they didn't realize what they had done. They had left the little girl in the bathtub with just a little water. It wasn't much water at all, but it was enough for the defenseless child to drown herself. The parents were tried, but criminal punishment was avoided. Both of them got a suspended sentence. And then, soon after the tragedy in the family, appeared another girl. And strangely enough, almost healthy. Ben and Rose were now being watched by the child welfare authorities. The parents had to prepare a bed, a stroller and other things for the child. And also now they maintained in the apartment more or less decent conditions, because they constantly came to the guardianship. And these visits were often sudden. Parents tried, probably still in their own way loved their daughter and were afraid that she would be taken to an orphanage. They even began to drink less, only on weekends when the guardianship officers could not come to them, allowed themselves to relax. But even on those safe days, the roommates partied as hard as they could. On one of these fun weekends, a natural event occurred. Rose dropped little Ruby, and she fell on top of her. She went to her daughter, because the girl cried, probably hungry. The woman wanted to take her out on the balcony so she wouldn't interfere with her rest. She tripped on the threshold. And then Harry was visiting his brother and saw the whole thing. The tragedy happened right in front of his eyes. "What have you done, silly?" He was furious with Rose. It bothered him that the girl had suddenly gone silent, as if someone had turned off the sound. It was a bad sign, a very bad sign. "What's the big deal?" She blinked her eyes. "What, you've never laid around drunk?" She seemed to have forgotten she was even holding a baby. Harry silently pointed to the infant's outstretched body on the floor. The baby wasn't breathing, that much was clear. The irresponsible parents had endangered the baby again. The third one already, realizing what had happened. Rose began to howl loudly. Ben came running out of the kitchen to hear her cries. He was about to be followed by the guests. They were drinking alcohol in the kitchen. But Harry, who was the most sober of those present, realized that he couldn't let anyone realize what had happened. He sternly ordered Ben and Rose to be quiet, to pull themselves together. The couple, happy that now they didn't have to decide or think of anything, obeyed. Rose put her daughter in her crib as if everything was fine, and the party went on as usual. Harry could see that Ben and Rose were barely thinking straight. They continued to drink, and even had fun. Either they'd forgotten what had happened or they hadn't realized it. The guests left at midnight. The hosts went to bed. Harry stayed with them. He could not sleep a wink, unlike his cousin and his wife. The man realized what misfortune had happened the night before. When the loving couple woke up, Harry reminded his relatives of the tragedy. Both parents rushed to the crib, convinced that Ruby was indeed dead. They panicked again, but it wasn't the fact that they were without a child again that mother and father feared. It was another prospect that terrified them. Ben and Rose had already miraculously avoided a real sentence once before. And now their baby was dead again. They couldn't get away with it now. "I don't want to go to prison," Rose howled. "I'm not going there again," Ben echoed her. They were so helpless at that moment. So pathetic, with tears and fear. Harry wanted to spit on his degraded relatives. But he didn't. After all, his mother had raised Ben when Harry's own mother died. The aunt had taken her nephew in with her, slim to none, but she hadn't let him go to waste. "Stop howling," he said sternly. "You've got to settle the body and then fake the kidnapping. Otherwise you'll be brought in and there'll be no escape. You'll both go to jail for years." Ruby was just a little girl. The cargo fit in a worn backpack. Ben took his daughter into the woods. It's unbelievable. Jane was in tears. You monsters. All of you. You don't understand us," Harry shrugged. "We survive as best we can." Ben came back quickly. It was still early morning. All three of them went out to the park to get some fresh air, to gather their strength. It was going to be a complicated and demanding job. Every detail had to be thought out. There was no room for error. That day fate favored the trio because Ben suddenly noticed a young woman. She was asleep with her head resting on the side of the stroller. Out of the stroller was a tiny girl who looked very much like Ruby and was about the same age. Ben silently pointed at the couple. All three of them looked at each other. The plan had come together instantly. "Rose did it," Harry admitted. She walked carefully over to the stroller and just took the baby and the blanket. Like butter, so simple, so easy. Not a single witness around. The young mother didn't even flinch. Everything went smoothly, perfectly. No one noticed anything. Not the child welfare authorities, not the doctors. Even the scar didn't give away Rose's kidnapper. They just covered it up with green. She lied to anyone who asked about it, that it was an accident. It happens to babies. It's no big deal. They got away with it. There was a lot of talk on the news about the missing girl. They searched for the kidnappers, but to no avail. A few years went by. Rose and Ben raised the little girl as their own. And they both continued to slide into the abyss. This lifestyle led to an early death for both of them, and the girl ended up in an orphanage. Harry often wondered if he should go to the police. The little girl was still being searched for, her family was suffering and hoping. Meanwhile, little Ellie was in the orphanage. An orphan, she had no idea how loved and expected she was. And no one had any idea. Harry felt sorry for the little girl, visited her sometimes. But he didn't risk going to the police. He wasn't directly involved in the crime, but he knew what had happened. That's enough to get him in the dock. Ellie's grown up smart. I guess genes do count for a lot. I guess she took after her family, Harry continued. We talked to each other the whole time. Then she got married. I didn't understand at first, but then I wondered, who are the groom's parents? I found your page on the internet. Harry looked at Jane, and she looked at him hard. And that's when I saw the picture. You're that woman, Ruby's real mother. I remembered her. Amber was on TV a lot back then, and there were pictures of her in the papers. There was so much pain in her eyes. You don't forget that. I asked Ruby about you, trying to figure out how you were related to that woman. We're friends, Jane replied. Close friends, almost sisters, Amber. All this time she'd been racked with guilt for not keeping her daughter safe. Now you know everything, Harry sighed. It makes me feel better. Please don't report me to the police. They were silent for a long time in the car. John didn't start the engine, trying to calm down after what they'd heard. So Ruby is Ellie. After all, Jane finally broke the silence. We'll have to do a DNA test to know for sure. And then we'll tell Amber. We still have to have a serious talk with Ruby. Jane sighed. How will she take it that everything she knew about her life was a lie? And this Uncle Harry, she loves him dearly. She's loved him all her life. As if he were her only soulmate. So he was one of her kidnappers. It would be a blow to Ruby. She'll be all right, John said confidently. Ruby's a strong girl and smart. You know, Jane smiled, Amber and I used to dream that our children would marry. Todd and Ellie were a few months old then. Can you believe it? And they did get married. That's what fate is, I guess. John shrugged. He finally came to his senses and turned the ignition key. All right, let's go. You and I have a lot to do now. Oh, I don't need chemistry, she said. I'm not going to need it in my life. I'm not going to be a doctor. Emily opened the money cabinet and looked around the shelves. She was packing a travel bag. A trip to visit her parents in her hometown of Cleveland was coming up. An unplanned one. She needed dark clothes. Emily pulled a pair of black tight jeans and a black sweater from the stack of clothes. These would do. The woman sighed, setting the packed heavy bag at the threshold. She had already hailed a cab for tomorrow morning that would take her to the train station. At 6 she would board the train and be in her hometown. Her childhood and youth were spent there. Many memories are associated with this place, mostly bright, joyful, happy ones. Emily's childhood was carefree and associated with Jennifer, the girl from the neighbor's driveway. Emily and Jennifer met when they were both 5 years old. Emily's family had just moved into the house. Her mom let her daughter go for a walk in the yard. It's hard to imagine that a 5-year-old girl would be allowed to walk alone now. Back then, especially in the provinces, such situations were the norm. Emily went down on foot, as the light elevator scared her so far, and ran out into the sun-drenched courtyard. Still in her memory was the smell of warmed wormwood, mint, and other fragrant herbs that littered the front yard. The yard and the playground were not yet landscaped. It happened later. Then the yard resembled a jungle and looked mysterious, alluring and promising adventure. There were children here. Some girls, sharing a blanket, were playing dolls. Emily wanted to approach them, but was shy. The girls were clearly a year or two older than she was. What caught her attention more was where the preschool boys were having a ball. From there came shouts, ringing kicks on the ball, sometimes friendly laughter. It was fun there. I wish I could go to them. But there's nothing to go to them. They wouldn't let you play. Emily loved soccer and was pretty good with a ball her older cousin Robert had taught her, but she was a girl. Boys rarely took girls to their games. Other children's companies were housed here, all busy doing their own things and playing their own games. Emily felt superfluous, but it was still more interesting in the yard than at home. Here, for example, was a huge barrel filled with rainwater. What's not an ocean? Emily immediately built a boat out of leaves and blades of grass, put a passenger in it, a ladybug, and sent the ship around the world. She didn't notice that a girl came up to her. "What is your name?" The little girl broke the silence. Emily flinched, thinking she was playing alone. But here was a girl of about 5, pretty, tanned, with freckles on her nose, blonde pigtails, and very curious blue eyes. Emily saw her in the company of children playing catch-up. "My name is Princess Eliza," Emily said. "That's a pretty name," she said. "Did you move here recently? I haven't seen you before. Just this morning. Does that mean your things were brought by a big green truck?" "Ours," Emily said, a little embarrassed. She was shy and had a hard time getting along with people. "My name is Jennifer," she smiled. "Let's be friends. Take your Princess Eliza and let's go to introduce her to Prince John. He's such a bug. I built him a castle there near the 6th entrance from cardboard, leaves and sand. He loves it. He lives there." And so began Jennifer and Emily's friendship from that memorable day when they first saw each other. Emily and Jennifer became best friends for many years. They attended the same group of kindergarten, together experienced the difficulties of preschool life, ate unappetizing semolina with the boys, protected each other from annoying children, learned roles for matines not only in the garden, but also in the yard after school. The girls were always playing together or in the company of other boys. They were very interesting together. Both had a rich imagination. They learned to read early and devoured one book after another. Their games were exciting, creative, unconventional. Of course, sometimes the girls participated in the usual children's games according to the rules, which arranged children in the yard catch up, hide and seek, Cossack robbers and the like. But they liked to create fantasy worlds inhabited by evil trolls, stupid giants, good princes and princesses. It didn't matter that the heroes of these exciting stories were stones, sticks, brick fragments. It was as if the girls didn't pay attention to it. They spent days on end working with what others considered trash. Parents had to convince their daughters to come home. People around them were surprised that such different girls were so friendly. Emily and Jennifer were strikingly different even in appearance. Emily was a thin, tall, swarthy girl with big dark eyes. Quiet, modest, shy, she was often lost in unfamiliar situations and was afraid of many things: deep holes, loud dogs, sometimes even cats. Jennifer, on the other hand, had a bold temperament. She loved to climb into dangerous, but very interesting places on the roofs of houses, in basements, in tall trees. She had many friends, as she easily found a common language with everyone. Noisy, daring, lively. And yet Jennifer and Emily were best friends because they both liked to create fantastic worlds out of trash and read the same books with adventure, magic, danger. In fact, they'd had fun together from the beginning. Soulmates, I guess. Later, Emily realized that it was rare to find such a friend and like-minded person, and as a child it seemed to her that this was the case with everyone. Time passed and the girls became first graders. Emily remembered the day when her mother first led her by the hand to the schoolyard. The girl felt so beautiful and grown up. A new uniform, a puffy white bow on her head, a real school backpack on her shoulders, which she chose herself. There were so many people in the yard: children, parents, teachers. There was loud music coming from somewhere, a song about a first grader who was having a party today. Emily clung to her mom's hand. As usual, she was uncomfortable in the crowd. "Come on, it's okay," said her mom, trying to calm down her worried daughter. "Now, you will go with the guys and the teacher to class. It's so great, so interesting." But Emily couldn't agree with her mom. She was scared with excitement, her palms were sweating, and for some reason the collar of her new dress was rubbing her neck. And then Jennifer ran up to Emily, so beautiful in her new uniform, with 2 pigtails decorated with white ribbons. Jennifer looked relaxed and cheerful as always. "What grade did you get into?" Smiling happily, she asked her friend. "First," Emily replied. "I'm in first." Jennifer cheered. "We are classmates, can you believe it? Yay! I made this wish on my birthday when I was blowing out the candles. Remember?" The friends hugged each other tightly. Emily's excitement and insecurity were gone. Jennifer was there now, so there was nothing to be afraid of. The girls held hands and followed the teacher into the classroom. At school, it quickly became clear that although Jennifer had taken to reading early, she was no prodigy. Yes, she was one of the top students in literature. Her writing was always praised and held up as an example. But other than that, Jennifer's math was a complete failure. Emily spent hours trying to explain to her friend the things that were obvious to her, but to no avail. Jennifer didn't even seem to be trying to understand anything. She wasn't interested in math, and that was it. She was only used to doing things she was really passionate about. That's just the way she was. Other subjects that required diligence and responsibility also passed Jennifer by. "And what are you going to be?" Emily wondered. "A rich man's wife," Jennifer answered again. "Not to work, but to do what I want all day long. And of course, children. I love children. I'll have at least 4 of them, 2 girls and 2 boys." Jennifer's life plans were very different from Emily's. She knew from 6th grade that she was going to be a journalist. She loved working with words and text. She, like Jennifer, was a great writer: succinct, sharp, beautiful. But unlike her carefree friend, Emily had a high level of responsibility and diligence, plus a natural ability. Thanks to all this, she studied on excellent from the 1st to 11th grade. But Jennifer had a lot of friends. She was adored for her sparkling sense of humor and the ability to find adventure in the right place. Emily could only marvel. She admired and was amazed by her friend's talent to be a celebratory person. She was always buzzing with life. Children were drawn to her like sunflowers to the sun. They needed bright impressions and fun. Emily wished she could be as inwardly free as Jennifer, but she couldn't. Jennifer could afford to argue with teachers, to skip class, to voice her opinion, even if it went against the opinion of others. Emily couldn't do that. It was important for her to be liked by others, especially adults. Jennifer sometimes jokingly and without offense called her friend a nerd. yet they were still best friends. Quiet, modest Emily at first, together with Jennifer and her gang, climbed on the roofs and trees, participated in dubious, but very fun adventures. Then she went to discos, to clubs where only adults were allowed. It was a lot of things. Emily often thought that if it wasn't for Jennifer, her childhood and youth would have been boring and gray. There was another striking difference between the friends. Unlike the demure Emily, Jennifer was constantly falling in love from the age of 9 or 10. Jennifer always had another prince in her mind, a classmate, an older guy, or even a famous actor. She always fell in love without looking and finally put the object of love on a pedestal, dedicated to him poems. Ours listed Emily as virtues. And of course the determined girl usually first took steps to get closer. Sometimes she succeeded. Then Jennifer soared for days, as if on wings, because another Brandon or Hunter took her on dates to cafes, movies, or parks and complimented her. And then disappointment inevitably set in, and very quickly. The prince wasn't a prince, the hero wasn't a hero. Jennifer wondered out loud, where were her eyes and how could she be so silly? If the prince remained unattainable, he continued to be flawless in Jennifer's eyes. But the longing for him sooner or later came to naught, because the girl in love began to get bored and chose another idol. Emily was very surprised by all this. She had never fallen in love during the whole time of school. She had always studied in the first place, because the girl once firmly decided to enter the journalism department of a prestigious metropolitan university. And there anyone is not taken. Emily, even in high school, went to the School of Journalists. Of course, she persuaded Jennifer also to try. After all, her friend had always been a very good writer. Maybe a career as a journalist would attract her, and she'd give up her dreams of being a rich husband's wife. Maybe they could even work together later. Jennifer loved journalism school. She wrote easily, found common language with people even easier. The only thing is that Jennifer did not do assignments that required diligence and responsibility. It was business as usual. Jennifer also didn't want to get up early on Sunday, her only day off, although there were classes at the School of Journalism on that day. But Jennifer almost always missed them. And then Jennifer suddenly fell in love with one of the teachers, a young but already well-known journalist in the city. He was married, but young Jennifer was not embarrassed by this fact. The girl, as always, one day went on the offensive, although Emily dissuaded her from this step. And then there was a scandal. The principal walked into the auditorium and saw Jennifer and a teacher kissing. As was often the case, Jennifer's forceful determination got the best of her. The teacher was fired. Jennifer was expelled from journalism school. But neither the first nor the second fact upset her. He turned out to be a weakling. Jennifer shared her impressions with a friend. When the principal came in, he got scared and started mumbling, "What is it? I kissed him," and he had nothing to do with it. Emily just sighed. She had no doubt that was exactly what had happened. Jennifer had kissed the teacher herself. The girl felt sorry for the one. Why did they kick me out of school? I was just about to leave school myself. I'm sick of it. At school, homework, homework. Here they're looking for the same thing. What's there to live for? In 11th grade, Jennifer had another crazy love affair. This time the prince was their neighbor Jason. The guy was a few years older than the girlfriends. He was raised by his father. Who is Jason's mother? Why is she not around them? The girls didn't know about that. They'd never really hung out with Jason because their ages and interests didn't match, except to say hello when they met. Only Jason's father, Charles, was some big boss at the local factory. So the small family, consisting of a son and a father, didn't need anything. Jason always had expensive, stylish clothes, the latest models of phones. And as soon as the guy turned 18, his father gave him a beautiful car. At that moment, when Jennifer realized that she was madly in love with this guy, he was studying at the university for an economist and was already working part-time at her father's factory. An enviable groom, to say the least, especially considering Jennifer's longtime dream of being a rich man's wife and not having to work. She made desperate attempts to win Jason's affection, but he remained indifferent. Calm, unperturbed, cold as a mannequin. His strange, soulless gaze frightened Emily. But Jason was a really good-looking guy, and a lot of people liked him. Jennifer wasn't left out. Emily hoped that her friend's next infatuation would die down on its own. It often did. Right now, Jennifer idolized Jason. Then someone else would come along. Except this time it seemed to be more serious than that. All Jennifer could talk about was Jason. Her eyes lit up in a special way, her face glowing with joy, a smile on her lips. Jennifer's feelings were incredibly strong. She hadn't noticed that Jason was selfish, soulless, and clearly cruel. He had always seemed even dangerous to Emily. But Jennifer was attracted to all of that. She thought Jason was a treasure trove of mysteries and secrets, and she couldn't wait to solve them. And she couldn't wait to solve Jason's mysteries. But finally, the last year of high school flew by. Emily had passed her high school exams. She was accepted to the University of Washington's journalism program. Seeing her name on the list of those admitted, the girl could not refrain from a joyful squeal. Her dream had come true. She had been working towards it for so long. A new, bright, rich life is ahead of her. You will have to work hard, but it will be very interesting. Jennifer, on the other hand, passed her exams with low grades. No one doubted it. The girl's parents had long ago saved money for paid education for their daughter, as they had a premonition of such a result. And Jennifer became a student of the local commercial law university. Emily went to Washington. Jennifer stayed in her hometown. They broke up for the first time. It was hard and uncomfortable. But gradually a new life spun Emily around. She had no time for sadness and lengthy reflections. Emily liked her studies very much. Life in the student dormitory, too. Emily made new friends and acquaintances. Since her third year, she had been working part-time at the local radio station. The salary was so good that the girl could afford to rent a separate apartment. At first, Emily came home twice a year for New Year's holidays and summer vacations. Then the visits were reduced to once in the summer. And later, when the university was left behind and the girl began to build a career, she completely stopped going to her parents. There was simply no time. Parents themselves visited their daughter. Emily was happy about these visits. How great it was to feel like a little favorite girl again, to learn the news of her hometown. With Jennifer, Emily at first often talked on the phone and corresponded. Friends were constantly in touch. Then communication gradually began to wane. Different interests, different goals, and the distance did not contribute to a close friendship. In the end, communication between friends was reduced to infrequent correspondence on social networks. Emily was a little sad about it, but she realized that life goes forward, everything changes, and at the same time Jennifer will still forever remain for her a close, almost native person. Emily realized her dream. She became a fairly well-known and in-demand journalist with an excellent salary. She interviewed wonderful, outstanding people, communicated with artists and scientists, made interesting reports. Emily lived the work, burned with it. It was really her life's work. Emily did not make a mistake then in 6th grade, deciding to devote herself to journalism. Jennifer, by the way, also fulfilled her dream. From correspondence with a friend, Emily learned that she married the very unavailable, handsome Jason. He started his own business with the help of his powerful father. Of course, things went so well that very soon the young family was able to afford a whole house in a luxury cottage community. Emily had seen the pictures. They were impressive: a palace in the middle of a luxurious garden, a swimming pool, a fountain in the yard, statues. And of course, Jennifer could afford not to work. She got everything she wanted, became a housewife. Soon after the wedding, the couple had 3 children, one after another, 2 boys and a girl. Only one more girl was missing, so that Jennifer's wish was fully realized. She had once dreamed of having 4 babies. Emily looked at the pictures of Jennifer's children and was filled with mixed feelings. Wow, she and her friend were the same age, and Jennifer was already a mother for the 3rd time. Emily hadn't even thought about procreation yet. Maybe there's something wrong with her, always putting work first. No, there were affairs in Emily's life, but these relationships did not lead to anything serious. Emily didn't want to get married. She liked the way she lives: a lot of work, socializing, traveling. On rare visits to her hometown, Emily always visited Jennifer and her babies. She would arrive with gifts for her friend and the kids, despite the long lulls in communication. Conversation with Jennifer usually flowed naturally and effortlessly. Jennifer remained just as fun and witty. Jason, on the other hand, was still very much disliked by Emily. He'd come home from work, greet her politely, and then hide in his room. Cold, aloof, predatory, even dangerous. But Jennifer seemed to be in love with him. And that's what matters. And then yesterday, that call at 12 o'clock in the morning, when Emily had already showered, changed into her pajamas, and was about to go to bed. The woman tensed up. Such late-night calls didn't usually bode well. When she saw her mom's name on the phone screen, Emily was truly frightened. She thought of her father, who had recently had a heart attack. Had something happened to him again? "We're in trouble," Mom's voice came through the phone. She was clearly holding back sobs. What Emily asked in a weakened voice. Her heart was clenched by the icy hand of anxiety. "Jennifer, there's no hope anymore. She's dead. The funeral is in 2 days. Will you come?" Emily felt dizzy. She had to sit upright on the floor to keep from falling. How? How could this be possible? Jennifer was young, healthy, blossoming. Emily had seen the pictures she'd posted from her children's birthday party until a couple days ago. Jennifer was smiling cheerfully into the lens and looked quite cheerful and energetic. "Mom, what happened?" Emily was surprised at how distressed and hoarse her voice sounded. "It's incomprehensible out there." "Nothing, daughter. I don't really know myself. Her mom, Aunt Cynthia, called me and she's hysterical." "That's understandable. Cynthia didn't really know what happened. But the funeral's in 2 days. Can you make it out?" "Well, of course," Emily replied. It's Jennifer, after all. And so the backpack was packed, the tickets bought, the cab booked. At work, Emily was given a month's vacation. Emily was met at home by her mom. Her eyes were crying, her face puffy, pale, her hair disheveled. She was clearly in shock. How does Jennifer's mom feel? I can't even imagine. I guess I should go visit Aunt Jenny. But it's scary. It's really scary. Mother and daughter hugged tightly, and then went into the kitchen, where the table was already set for tea. The caring parent had been baking Emily's favorite potato pie since morning, but she couldn't hardly eat a bite right now. "I can't believe it," Emily said, sitting down in her chair. "I just can't. It seems like some kind of mistake, and I can't believe it." Nodded her mother sadly, settling down next to her daughter. What happened after all? The mother sighed heavily. It was obvious that she was having a very difficult time starting this conversation. "Jennifer. She kind of did it to herself." What Emily aghast. "It definitely can't be. It just can't be." Jennifer really loved life. She had so much energy, positivity in her. There's no way she would have done something like that. I was very surprised too. I've known her since she was a kid. She's fun and very strong. But there's a note. She left a farewell letter, asking me not to blame anyone. And it's definitely her handwriting. Forensics confirmed it. What nonsense! Emily pounded her fist on the table in frustration. It's not true. She would never do such a thing. But you haven't talked to her in a while. People change. So what? Jason is Jennifer's husband. He's been saying for a long time that she has some kind of nervous disorder. And even not too long ago, she spent a few months in a sanitarium for treatment. Then Jennifer seemed to get better. But that must have been just an appearance, because in the end, it turned out to be Jennifer's nervous breakdown. Emily didn't believe a word her mother said. None of this was like her friend. I was surprised, too, her mother continued. But maybe the birth had that effect on her. It's not easy. How did it happen? Emily asked another question. It turned out that Jennifer had simply stepped from the apartment window. That apartment had recently been given to the couple by Jason's father. Or rather, not even to them, but to his eldest grandson. He was going to give the other children the same gifts as a plan for the future. Jennifer loved going there. She explained to her parents that she just vitally needed a few hours of solitude. Jennifer would rest in the peace and quiet, regain her strength, and drive back to her young children. After all, there was so much to do waiting for her cleaning, cooking, activities with the little ones. That day everything was as usual. Jennifer called her mother-in-law, her husband's stepmother, to be with the children, got into her car, and went to the apartment. There, apparently, the woman took a bath, watched TV, and it is unknown what happened. Either the fateful decision ripened suddenly, or Jennifer had originally planned this step. But she wrote a note saying she was doing it voluntarily. She opened the window and... No, 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 Emily exclaimed, interrupting her mother. She couldn't have done it on her own. I know Jennifer. She wouldn't do something like that. There's no way she would. There's something wrong with her nerves. Her mother shook her head sorrowfully. It's some kind of underlying personality change. Emily stood by her opinion. No, Jennifer would never take that step. No way. She loved life, adored her children. Jennifer would have definitely found another way out of any difficult situation. The funeral was scheduled for this morning. The funeral parlor was crowded with people. Emily estimated that there must have been more than 100 people here. Among those present, she noticed former classmates, grown up sad, silent. Jennifer's parents were hard for Emily to even look at. But she approached them nonetheless. How could she not? She wanted to support the people who had always welcomed her into their home. They hugged each other. Emily couldn't find the right words. She didn't need to. Soon enough, some other people approached Jennifer's mother and father to offer their condolences. Emily stepped back in relief. A lacquered dark coffin stood in the center of the hall, covered by a lid. The body didn't look its best after the fall. Emily was relieved to realize that she wouldn't have to see Jennifer, always a cheerful and upbeat friend, lying in the coffin. Emily couldn't take her eyes off the photo of the deceased Jennifer, smiling openly and sincerely at everyone present. The mourning ribbon in the corner contrasted unpleasantly with the cheerful sparkle of her blue eyes. Emily felt tears coming to her eyes again. It was so ridiculous, so unfair and irreparable. The worst part was that there was nothing that could be done about it. The only thing left to accept was the fact that Jennifer was gone and would never be. Never. Jason stood at the casket, surrounded by friends and family. As always, he looked aloof, cold and emotionless, like a mannequin. Her friend's husband disgusted Emily. Even in a situation like this, he kept his icy calm. Did Jason have any feelings at all? Did he love Jennifer, or was he only letting her love herself? "Excuse me, are you Emily?" She turned around and saw a skinny teenage girl. Tall, black-haired, with long hair, looking something like Emily herself as a child. Yes, Emily nodded. "My name is Emma. I live next door to Jennifer and I used to visit them a lot. You see, I love babies so much, and she has 3 of them at once." "I just adore them," Emma said. Emily nodded. She remembered Jennifer telling her about the baby girl. Emma had helped her a lot with the children, and she'd done it wholeheartedly. She liked to mess around with the little ones. I think she dreamed of having a brother or sister, but her parents never granted her that wish. So Emma enjoyed spending time with the neighborhood babies, and she had become friends with Jennifer herself. "Hello, Emma. I've heard a lot about you." "You're good," Emily pronounced. I'm really scared, but I need to tell you something." "Jennifer asked me to." Emma tensed as if pierced by lightning from head to toe. Emily knew immediately that it was something very important, something that might shed some light on what had happened to her friend. "Yes, of course. Don't be afraid of anything. I'll understand everything. Absolutely everything." "It's not you I'm afraid of." Emma pointed a glance at Jason. "Shall we step back?" The girl nodded. Emily led her down the hall. It was empty and quiet here. The woman and the girl settled on the soft couch just in front of the front door. "He's mean," Emma said in almost a whisper. "He used to hurt Jennifer, and she was very afraid of him. I've been visiting them a lot. I've seen and noticed everything. And he doesn't like children. He doesn't like anyone at all." Emily listened without interrupting. Was her hunch about Jason really true? There was a reason he'd always seemed so unpleasant. Jennifer had it bad there, but she wouldn't leave because of the kids. I once heard Jason yelling that he wouldn't give them to her. Emily nodded. Jason was a rich, powerful man. The law often sided with just such people. Jennifer had no chance of taking the children against her husband's wishes. "She's been kind of anxious lately," Emma continued. "I felt so sorry for her. She was afraid of something. Very afraid. Especially after she'd been treated at that sanatorium. But she didn't share her problems with me. I saw it all, noticed it all." "I'm not a little girl," Emma said. That day, as usual, she came to Jennifer's house to play with the babies. They were having fun together, laughing, joking, making up interesting games. And then the phone rang. Emma caught a glimpse of the caller on the phone screen. It was Jason. Jennifer stepped aside to talk to her husband. Emma stayed with the babies, but she kept an eye on her neighbor. Her face had changed, turning pale. Jennifer could barely hold back tears. It was obvious. This conversation was clearly not going to be pleasant. "Will you watch the kids?" Jennifer turned to Emma with a smile. She was trying very hard to look calm in front of the girl. "Sure," Emma agreed. Jennifer disappeared into the house for a while and then returned. She had an envelope in her hand. Nadia asked me not to tell anyone about this letter and to keep it somewhere secret so no one would find it. She said if anything should happen to her, for me to give this letter to her friend Emily, which is you. And how did you recognize me? A startled Emily asked. Emma smiled. Very simple. Jennifer loved to talk about her childhood. And about you, too. She showed me pictures and was very proud of you for accomplishing so much. Tears came to Emily's eyes again. Jennifer often thought and talked about her, but she hardly remembered her friend. What a good friend. In difficult moments, Jennifer didn't even try to turn to her for help. Didn't want to burden her, probably because, frankly, they'd barely spoken to each other lately. So where's that letter? Emily asked. Emma pulled a crumpled envelope from the deep pocket of her wide black pants. Emily took it in her hands and tucked it carefully into the small bag hanging on her shoulder. She would read it later at home, alone and quiet. Now was not the time. Emma, there you are, a young woman, probably the girl's mother, ran out into the hall. I've been looking everywhere for you, the woman said. And here I am. I ran into Jennifer's friend. She's been asking about her. About the last few days. She and I talked about Jennifer, Emma replied. I see the woman nodded, giving Emily a quick glance. Come on, it's already time to head to the cemetery. Not a cozy cemetery. Cold wind, crowds of people, a warm canteen with simple and delicious food that didn't fit in Emily's mouth, though. The day passed like a blur. Everything that happened seemed to Emily like a terrible dream. She was going to open her eyes and find that nothing had happened. Emma never came near her again. Occasionally they met glances. Jason was staring at Emily from across the dining room, scrutinizing her. It wasn't pleasant. Finally, it was time to go home. Emily breathed a sigh of relief. It had been a long day. She wanted to be in a cozy, quiet place, to cry alone for a while, and of course to read the note, the letter Jennifer had asked Emma to give to her, her best friend. At home, Emily locked herself in the bathroom, turned on the water, so her parents would think she was taking a shower. Then she pulled an envelope out of her jeans pocket and hastily ripped it open. It was a crumpled piece of white paper, written in Jennifer's not-so-clean handwriting on both sides. Emily took a seat on the edge of the tub and delved into the reading. Emily, hi. If you're reading this letter, it means something has happened to me, was how Jennifer's message began. Emily shrugged her shoulders shakily, her ears feeling as if her friend's voice was ringing in her ears. It turned out that Jennifer had suggested that Jason formalize the relationship years ago. She'd been very fond of him at the time and was happy that a guy like that was paying attention to her. They dated. Jason courted the girl according to the standard scheme: flowers, gifts, cafes, movies, just like in the movies and books. And then one day Jennifer just proposed to him. He, having weighed all the pros and cons, agreed. And that's how they got married. At first, Jennifer felt the happiest in the world. The man she loved by her side. Jennifer became the wife of a wealthy man, just as she had always dreamed. Now she and her future children would have everything they could ever want. But as the initial excitement faded, Jennifer began to notice oddities. Jason wasn't just reserved, as Jennifer had always thought. The girl believed that Jason's coldness was the result of being raised without a mother. There was some murky history there. Neither Samuel, Jason's father, nor the husband himself liked to discuss it. It seemed his mother had abandoned her son and husband when Jason was about 11 or 12, seemingly falling in love with someone and literally running away. Yet after a few years, Jennifer realized that Jason's emotionless, indifferent behavior was not the norm. But far worse were the outbursts of aggression and hatred. They didn't manifest themselves right away when Jennifer realized what her husband was like. It was too late. Jason wasn't particularly thrilled with the news of his wife's first pregnancy. It was strange and a little hurtful. But Jennifer dealt with her feelings. After all, women become mothers when they find out they are pregnant. Men, on the other hand, only turn into fathers when they see their babies for the first time. Jennifer believed that having a baby would melt the ice in her husband's heart. When the firstborn appeared, Jennifer enjoyed motherhood. Her husband honestly provided his wife and baby everything necessary, gave money, bought expensive clothes and diapers, paid for appointments with the best children's pediatricians. But Jennifer never saw a smile and tenderness in her husband's eyes when he looked at their funny baby, only irritation. Yes, Jason didn't like the baby crying at night. And later he became angry with the boy's scattered toys, tied with flexible baby hands, surfaces, crumbs, and food stains around the high chair. Jason made remarks to his wife, called her a slob, a bad mother. And Jennifer believed it. She really thought she was a terrible hostess who, when she wasn't working and sitting at home, couldn't provide her spouse with comfort and order. Then another son was born, and after that a daughter. All the children were born a year and a half apart. It is clear that Jennifer had no time to pay attention to the changes occurring with her spouse. Jason became more and more distant, cold, indifferent, and irascible. Jennifer could never predict when the next storm would erupt. Sometimes Jason would step on a scattered piece of construction equipment, wrinkle his nose, but move on calmly. Other times he'd be freaked out by something small, a sudden loud scream from one of the kids, a stain on the table, scattered clothes. Jennifer tried very hard to keep everything in perfect order, but with 3 babies in her arms, it was difficult. And then Jason would get angry, calling Jennifer names, throwing things on the floor, shouting threats. Jennifer didn't say a word. At first she tried to object, but then she realized it only made her husband angrier. Jennifer was scared at times like this. Jason's eyes glittered with rage, his fists clenched as if he could barely contain himself from hitting his wife. Jennifer was afraid that one day he'd lose his temper and beat her, and then he wouldn't be able to stop. Jason had occasional affairs on the side. Jennifer noticed it by various signs: the smell of women's perfume on her husband's clothes, nightly texts with someone. Jason often stayed late at work, and then came home in the morning, drunk, cheerful, with a nightclub bracelet on his wrist. The man wasn't even particularly secretive about his hobbies. Jennifer was hurt at first. She had loved this man since she was young. Once he had seemed so attractive to her, mature, confident, reserved, mysterious. And then, somehow, the love had faded away. Only fear and disgust remained. When to tolerate humiliation and insults is no longer left strength, Jennifer decided to have a serious conversation with her husband. The woman wanted a divorce. It was not easy to dare such a step. Jennifer had 3 very young children in her arms. At work, she will not soon be able to go out. Will have to live practically in poverty after the children got used to separate rooms, a gallery of toys, delicious food, entertainment. But the woman was prepared for the hardship. Anything was better than living in constant fear. What do you need them for? Children only annoy you. How will you raise them without me? Except that Jason didn't behave the way Jennifer thought he would. The woman believed that her husband also realized that he had made a mistake and would only be happy to get rid of the noisy family. You can go on your way, Jason said, looking at Jennifer with his usual indifference and contempt. But I'm not giving you the kids. What do you mean? The woman was confused. It's very simple. No court will award the kids to a man who doesn't earn money and plans to live with his parents in a cramped 2-room apartment. You do not have enough room for 6 people, even according to the norms. So make your own conclusions. Whose side will the guardianship and the court take? Jennifer clapped her eyes shut. She hadn't even thought about it. She thought she'd just leave with the kids and that was it. Simple. The same way my father raised me. I'll hire a nanny while they're young. My stepmother will be happy to help. She loves them. You know, it'll be easier later. You can go wherever you want. You've probably already found someone. That's why you decided to divorce me. Am I right? No, Jennifer shook her head negatively. I don't have anyone. I just can't live like this anymore. You're always yelling at me, annoying me, insulting me, and you don't deserve it, Jason countered. I never yell for nothing. It's always for a reason. Jennifer sighed sadly. Jason was too strong an opponent. You shouldn't even start a fight with him. Emily says, I'm going to run for office. Do you know about that? Jennifer nodded. Emily, I need a spotless reputation. Kids, wife, that sort of thing. A happy, complete family. If you walk away, leaving the kids behind, that's even better. Single dad. That's the kind of guy the public sympathizes with and respects. So stay or go. It's up to you. But I'm keeping the kids. Jennifer sighed and silently went to the nursery. The youngest daughter woke up and called for her mom. Of course she would stay here with the kids. She wouldn't leave them alone with strange Jason. The little ones are everything to her. She would have to be patient. Time was running out. The situation was getting worse. Now Jason would sometimes, in a fit of rage, let himself push Jennifer around. He even gave her the occasional slap that made her cheeks burn for a long time. The man, as he had dreamed, got his post. His career was booming. His business was booming. One day, Jennifer went to the hospital with her eldest son. The boy managed to catch pneumonia, high fever, wheezing in the lungs. 2 days in intensive care. It was scary. The other 2 children were staying with Jason's mother-in-law, Anastasia. She had no children of her own, so she enjoyed spending time with her grandchildren. And here, right in the children's hospital, Jennifer met Andrew, the man she fell in love with almost at first sight. Jennifer didn't understand herself. It seemed like a setting, but it didn't make for a romantic mood, a hospital room, pajamas, coughing children all around. And yet Andrew was the only father on the whole floor. Usually it was mothers or grandmothers who went to the hospital with their children. But here, suddenly it was a man. Naturally, he got a lot of attention. Apparently he was used to it, joking, smiling, but not angry or annoyed. Andrew helped anyone who needed help. Some of them opened tightly screwed lids on jars. Some of them carried a child to the treatment room. Once Jennifer saw how Andrew very deftly picked up a baby from an inexperienced mother who could not cope with her baby. In kind eyes, soft character, desire to help everyone, and at the same time very attractive appearance. Sonechka, 5-year-old daughter Andrew, like a monkey, hung on his wonderful father. Between them there was a close, trusting relationship. It was immediately apparent. One day Jennifer realized that she was purposely looking for a meeting with Andrew and searching for excuses to talk to him. She wanted to be near this man, to see his kind gray eyes, to hear his calm voice. It was as if waves of warmth and acceptance radiated from him. Friendly, always ready to help, attentive. How could Jennifer miss all that? The woman was desperately jealous of Andrew's wife. Once Jennifer did not hold back and directly stated this to the man. It so happened that they both ended up at the hospital window in the hallway after lights out. Jennifer said, "Ah, there's a whole world out there somewhere." Andrew said jokingly, looking at the lights of the night city. "When Sonia is discharged, we'll go straight to the woods. We'll go for a walk. I envy your wife." Jennifer couldn't help herself. "You're wonderful. Pardon my candor." "I don't have a wife." Andrew looked at Jennifer seriously. The woman was surprised by this confession. Andrew didn't usually talk about his life. Other moms tried to find out details, asked personal questions, but the man only guffawed. And now, all of a sudden, such frankness. "I'm sorry," Jennifer mumbled in embarrassment. For some reason, she thought it was a tragedy. "It's all right," the man smiled broadly. He must have guessed Jennifer's thoughts because he hurried to reassure her. "My wife is fine. She's got a new family, and we just had a son. We divorced when Sonia was 3. She didn't want to stay with us." "So that's it," Jennifer exhaled. She didn't understand this strange woman. How could anyone leave Andrew? He's already so. Jennifer tried to find some flaw in him, but she couldn't. "She could understand," the man continued. "Jennifer, she's very young, 5 years younger than me. And then she's diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Emily was born prematurely. At first, the doctors said our little girl wouldn't be able to walk at all. But you see the results. It's all the fruit of a lot of hard work." Andrew nodded. Of course, he'd noticed that Emily was a little behind. She wasn't nodding her head very well, and her right arm wasn't obeying. But all in all, she was a perfectly healthy and cheerful child, and importantly, a happy one. Jennifer couldn't take it all. Emily was growing up, her problems becoming more and more obvious. She was very different from healthy children.
So Jennifer met her former classmate. They developed feelings for each other. We decided breaking up was the best thing to do in that situation. Don't get me wrong, Jennifer visits Emily, gives her gifts, enjoys our success.
You've worked a miracle. If you hadn't told me about the diagnosis, I wouldn't have known. Emily's doing great. She's a real fighter, and the doctors are good. She fights for her child, and this is the result. Andrew and Cynthia stood at the window for hours. They talked about everything: children, movies, books. Somewhat imperceptibly in the conversation, both of them switched to you. Cynthia found it easy and pleasant to be around this man. It seemed as if they had known each other for many years. The conversation flowed so easily and naturally. Andrew was an intelligent and sensitive conversationalist. The closer Cynthia got to know him, the more she fell in love with him. It turns out that for the sake of his daughter, the man had to give up his managerial position. He could no longer devote much time to work. It was necessary to rehabilitate Emily. But Andrew honorably got out of the situation. From scratch created a business and automobile repair shop. At the head of the company put his brother. So the man had the opportunity to combine earning money with caring for his daughter. Since then, Cynthia and Andrew every evening, without conspiracy, met at the same window. In the evening, when the lights were turned out and the children were asleep, they stood talking. Then one day Andrew suddenly kissed Cynthia. It happened out of the blue. They were discussing the works of Stephen King, when suddenly Andrew lifted Cynthia's face by her chin and pressed his lips to hers. The woman happily responded to the kiss, wrapping her arms around Andrew's neck. She was dizzy with unexpected happiness. She had never dreamed of such a thing. "I'm sorry," Andrew said softly, pulling away from Cynthia. "It's just that I liked you as soon as I saw you. You're married with 3 children. I can't ruin all that." "There's nothing to ruin," Cynthia sighed. The mention of her husband marred the happy moment, and Cynthia, clinging to Andrew's safe, strong shoulder, told him about her married life. It was the first time she had opened her soul to someone. He listened without interrupting. The man's face grew more and more gloomy. "I know him." "Of course I know him," Andrew shook his head. "Your husband is a very powerful and well-known man in the city. That's the problem." Cynthia sighed again. Andrew and Emily were the first to be discharged. Cynthia longed for no dates. She missed talking to Andrew at the hospital window. How sad it was to suddenly find herself without his warm embrace and encouraging phrases. Next to this man, Cynthia felt happy and peaceful. Then Cynthia and Matthew were discharged. Andrew and Cynthia could no longer imagine life without each other. They met in the park now. Cynthia would go there for a walk with her children. Andrew would show up with Emily. They made a very merry group. What wonderful walks they had. Andrew would play with the little ones. He was always able to devise noisy, merry amusements, so that the park would be filled with the happy laughter of the children for a long time. Cynthia admired this picture and felt warm and sad at the same time. Sad that she and Andrew could not be together. Of course, Jason wouldn't let that happen. Meanwhile, they were often mistaken for a large, happy family. Sometimes the whole company would visit Andrew and Amber. Father and daughter lived in a spacious apartment, clean and tastefully furnished. Jennifer wondered how the man managed to keep the house in such order. Very rarely Andrew and Jennifer were alone together, without the children. Jennifer would send her trio to her mother-in-law's house, who was always happy to see the little ones. Andrew took his son to his parents, and the lovers went to the movies, cafes, restaurants. Just walked around the city or even went nowhere. Stayed at Andrew's apartment all day. Jennifer didn't care where to spend time with the man she loved. The main thing was to be together. The rest was details. Of course, Jennifer occasionally thought about the fact that she was, in fact, cheating on her husband, but her conscience didn't bother her much. First of all, Jason was completely indifferent to her. They have long lived as neighbors, not as husband and wife. Secondly, it was her husband who first started cheating on her. He's always with someone else, and Jason doesn't even hide it. So why would Jennifer care? The only thing that made her sad was that she couldn't leave Jason. Her husband wouldn't let her go. That much was obvious. He's a big man now, and he has far-reaching plans. The man is going to build a career, and for that he needs an impeccable reputation. The divorce in this situation is out of the question. And if Jennifer tries, Jason will take the children away from her. It's well within his power. He'll make his wife look like a deadbeat mom. Jason's powerful and influential, so we have to play by his rules. Jason's career had a huge upside. The man often went on long business trips. During such periods, Jennifer had a moral rest. There was no need to be afraid of sudden outbursts of anger of her husband, did not have to endure insults and humiliation. Jason grew angrier and more aggressive over time. Jennifer seemed to irritate him just by looking at her. He looked at her contemptuously, as if she were a bug. He'd slapped her with unfair rebukes, and he'd spread his arms around her. Slaps, shoves, snaps, little things. And of course it was all painful, hurtful, and unpleasant. Jennifer couldn't even tell Andrew about it. For some reason the woman felt a burning shame, as if she herself was guilty of something. And then it happened in the spring, in the middle of April. Jennifer suddenly realized that she was pregnant, and only Andrew could be the father. In the first second, the woman rejoiced she has under her heart right now lives and develops a child from the man she loves, What could be more wonderful? But then came the fear, sticky, cold, dragging. Jason would know right away it wasn't his baby, wouldn't he? They hadn't had a relationship in a long time. It wasn't hard to guess what his reaction would be. He's lost his temper over more minor details. Jennifer didn't know what to do. She did not tell Andrew about the pregnancy, because she was simply afraid for the man she loved. Once he knew he was about to become a father, he would probably act on it. He'll try to meet with Jason to convince him to let Jennifer go. Jason, out of anger, might even hurt Andrew or send him to the other side of the world. That's not out of the question. Jason is a scary man, a real monster. Time was running out. Jennifer's stomach had already started to round out, but in order for Andrew not to notice anything, she had to break off her relationship with him. It was hard. Jennifer simply stopped answering Andrew's calls and texts and blocked him on social media. But he still hit on her. Jennifer was returning with her daughter from pediatric dentistry at the time. The woman had almost reached her car, which had to park on the other side of the street, as suddenly someone grabbed her arm. Jennifer turned around sharply. It was him, Andrew. How much she wanted to throw herself right into his arms, to cuddle into his safe shoulder, to cry and tell about all her worries. Andrew, as always, will understand, support, find the right words, but you cannot. Jennifer put her daughter in the baby seat. During this time, she gathered her thoughts, came to her senses a little, then returned to Andrew, already ready for a difficult conversation. "What's going on?" he asked. There was so much anxiety and hope in his eyes. "Don't you get it?" Jennifer shrugged indifferently. "I don't think it's hard to guess. I'm not answering your calls and messages. Then, I don't want to. We had a wonderful affair, but it's over." "Why?" Andrew looked puzzled. "I'm bored," Jennifer replied. "Just bored. I was bored in the hospital, and here you were, all lovey-dovey and enthusiastic. It was exciting and fun. But it's over. Are you not telling the truth right now?" Andrew's eyes seemed to look right into Jennifer's soul. "I know that our relationship isn't just about having fun. It's so much more than that to you. I can see it in your eyes, your words, even your gestures. There's no hiding it." "You're just making it up for yourself," Jennifer looked at Andrew arrogantly. "Because it's hard for you men to accept that women sometimes reject you." She got behind the wheel and drove away. Just drove away, leaving a confused Andrew there on the road with a broken heart and heavy thoughts. It was hard, very hard. But Jennifer had one more difficult event ahead of her, an explanation with Jason, because soon it would be impossible to hide the pregnancy. Of course, upon learning of what had happened, Jason had expectedly become furious. From insults, to which Jennifer this time did not even have anything to object, he went to beatings, an unusual slap, and a push. Jason hit his wife directly on her visibly rounded belly. She screamed, begging him to stop, covering the unborn child with her hands. "I'm beating the brat out of you." Jason yelled, "I don't want no other people's babies here. But I'll have to go to the hospital. That's where the beating will be discovered." Jennifer cried through her sobs to Jason. The words had an effect. Jason stopped. He cared deeply about his reputation. Beating his pregnant wife didn't fit the image of a respectable family man. "I'll think about what to do about it," Jason said, and went to his office, slamming the door loudly. Jennifer exhaled with relief. The worst of it, she thought, was over. But the plan Jason had told her this morning was so monstrous that Jennifer almost fainted. Her eyes went black, her whole world spinning and twisting. "You're going to a private hospital, a sanitarium, a quiet place in the mountains," Jason said. "Not many people know about this place. It's a closed clinic. That's where you're going to have this baby. It's only a couple months away. He'll go straight to the orphanages as an unknown foundling. Everyone will think I sent you to a sanitarium for a nervous breakdown. Then you'll come back, and we'll forget about this unfortunate incident. What about us? We can't leave the child in the family." Jennifer begged. "Let everyone think it's yours." "Please, how can I live with the knowledge that the baby is growing up in an orphanage? Please don't do this to me." You should have thought of that before Jason cut him off. "I will not have another man's child in my house. It's going to be like I said. End of story." And so it was. Jennifer spent 2 months in a strange, closed hospital in total isolation. There were other patients there. Jennifer heard them occasionally, but they never crossed paths. She only interacted with the staff, and that was strictly on business. All of these nurses seemed withdrawn and aloof. Apparently they were under orders not to have any personal relationships with patients. Jennifer stroked her belly, where her own and already very favorite child lived right now, and persuaded the baby not to come into the world any longer. After all, they would be separated immediately. Jennifer couldn't imagine going through with it. But the labor began exactly on time. Jennifer, who had already given birth to 3 children, immediately recognized the contractions. She was lifted into the delivery room, and just 3 hours later Emily, her daughter, her baby girl, was born. But the baby wasn't placed on Jennifer's chest, as it had been on 3 previous occasions, or even told the gender. Jennifer saw for herself that it was a girl, and even managed to notice that the baby looks a lot like Amber. No surprise, they were siblings after all. The baby cried loudly, and very loudly, a good sign. The newborn was clearly demanding to be placed at her mother's breast. Jennifer lifted herself up on the couch and held out her arms to her daughter, her eyes immediately filled with tears. More than anything else in the world, the woman now wanted to press the baby to herself, to warm her with warmth, to breathe in the sweet infant smell. But of course she was not allowed to do so. The baby was taken away at once. Jennifer screamed like a wounded animal, jumped to her feet, wanted to run after the baby, but the nurses were ready. They grabbed Jennifer's arms from both sides. The woman felt a sharp pain in her shoulder. It was the 3rd nurse who gave her an injection. Her eyes immediately went dark. Jennifer felt her legs go out from under her. She woke up in a familiar room. Jennifer was lying on a bed, carefully covered with a sheet. Outside the window it was evening. She had slept for almost 24 hours, for her daughter had been born in the morning. That's when Jennifer had been given that sedative injection. And now it's evening. It had been a long time. Her whole body ached. She felt dizzy, nauseous, weak. She probably couldn't even get to the toilet, let alone fight for her child. Tears flowed from her eyes. She would never see her baby girl again. She can only hope that her daughter has good foster parents. They say healthy newborns are quickly taken from shelters. Jennifer spent about another week in the hospital. Gradually she recovered and got used to the loss. Then it was back home and seeing her mom, her children, and Jennifer's mother-in-law, Anne. It was good for them. This woman, who had dreamed of children all her life, spoiled the kids, gave them all her attention. But they still missed their mother very much, which upset and even a little annoyed their adoptive grandmother. About the youngest daughter, Jennifer tried not to remember and do not think. But how could she? The little girl dreamed about her at night. Sometimes the woman thought she could hear her crying, as if her daughter was trying to reach her mother. Where is she now? What's wrong with her? The intense longing for Andrew also returned. Jennifer vitally missed his voice, his touch, his smell. Only this man now could somehow make her feel better. But she'd pushed him away, and rightly so. It was safer for everyone. And yet, one day, her feelings overpowered her. Jennifer realized she couldn't stay with Jason anymore. She hated him, hated this house. The very atmosphere here is slowly destroying her. To get some respite from the oppressive feelings, Jennifer sometimes went to spend time alone in the apartment that Grandpa Sergei had given to her eldest son, Matthew. Of course, the little boy didn't need a whole apartment. But for his mother, it became a place where you can be alone with yourself, sorrow, cry, just lie in silence. The biggest advantage of the apartment was that Jason was never here. One day, Jennifer decided to have a serious talk with her husband. "I can't take it anymore," she admitted to Jason. "We have to break up. I'm leaving."
"You're going to your lover?" Jason clarified.
"It doesn't matter. I'm leaving you. I'm leaving you, because I don't feel like I can take it much longer." "It's very important," Jason said angrily, looking her over from head to toe. "Do you have any idea what my colleagues will think of me when they realize that my wife cheated on me and left me for some jerk? Do you realize what that would do to my business, to my reputation?" Jason, But he wasn't listening. He got up from his chair and left the room. But since that conversation, his behavior had changed, and not for the better. He started beating her. He took out his anger on her, kicked her, punched her in the face and stomach, threw her against the walls. Now the woman was often covered in bruises and abrasions. Jason kept her locked up in this state. The man was afraid that people would guess what he was doing to his wife. Jennifer's life became simply unbearable. He's a deeply sick man, she realized only now. Jason is threatening to send me to the other side of the world and make it look like an accident. Emily, if anything happens to me, this letter will fall into your hands. Know that whatever happened to me, Jason, did it. He's a scary, dangerous man. Stay away from him. All I ask of you is that you find my little girl and tell Andrew about her. He'll take her and raise her with Amber. Jennifer's letter ended with those words. Next came Andrew's home address and the name of Palm City, the neighborhood where the hospital where Jennifer had given birth was located. Emily set aside the scribbled sheets of paper and only then noticed the tears streaming down her face. But wow. Jennifer, it turns out, has been living in a living hell, and what happened to her wasn't her decision. Not for nothing, Emily immediately did not believe in the delusional version. Jason had something to do with this tragedy, and Emily will prove it. She'll prove it. But first she had to find Andrew, tell him everything, and together they could figure something out. Emily went to Andrew's house the next day. She went up to the 6th floor, found the right apartment, rang the bell. A man opened the door, just as Jennifer had described him in her letter. Andrew looked glum, and a 3-day stubble covered his cheek. It's understandable. He's dealing with the death of a loved one. He's having a hard time, Emily thought. Hello, she said. I'm a friend of Jennifer's. Emily told him everything and showed him the letter. Andrew took it from her hands and ran his eyes over it. The man's face alternately expressed a variety of emotions: tenderness, joy, anger. It was no surprise to Emily. The letter shook her to the core. You bastard! Andrew jumped up from his chair, unable to find a place for himself with rage. Did he do this? I'll tear him to pieces. Wait, Emily put her hand on the man's shoulder. You won't get anywhere that way. Either he'll kill you, or you'll go to jail. What about you? You have 2 daughters who need your care and attention. You need to save the younger one, and you need to save her now. The woman's words cooled Andrew's fervor a little. He returned to his chair and showed that he was ready for further dialogue. I have a plan, Emily said. I've been thinking about it all night. It sounds good, but I can't do it alone. Andrew and Emily started by visiting Jason's mother. The same mother that Sergei said had left him and her son for another man. Christina lived in a modest 2-bedroom on the outskirts of Los Angeles. She turned out to be a very pleasant older woman. I didn't leave my son, she explained to the visitors. I just started to notice that something was wrong with Jason. He was cruel, callous. Other kids play with puppies and kittens, taking care of them, and he was interested in torturing them. Jason hurt his peers. Didn't understand other people's feelings. He never loved anyone. I saw that my son was sick. It's not normal for a young child to be so cruel, so cold. I wanted to take him to a specialist, but Sergei thought there was nothing wrong with the boy, and forbade even to think about showing his flawless, intelligent son. Such a shame for him, a doctor. And when I disobeyed, he got angry, so he kicked me out. Anyway, it was just an excuse. It had been coming for a long time. I begged him to give me my son. Jason needed treatment, but no way. Sergei was already a powerful man. It was useless to fight him, although I tried, of course. Jason's mother shed some light on his identity. Andrew and Emily were finally convinced that he was a deeply sick man. Such people with power and money become 2, if not 3 times as dangerous. Emily realized that she was taking a risk by going to the police, but she still filed a report. She asked for a more thorough investigation of Jennifer's case and attached a copy of the letter to her dead friend, highlighting the places where she talked about her husband's threats and her fears. The case went forward. Investigators took a closer look at the footage from the cameras on the entrances and found that Jennifer entered the entrance not alone, but together with her husband Jason. His face was clearly visible. In addition, there were witnesses who saw a man who looked like Jason pushing the woman out. So the husband went from victim to defendant, but other evidence of his guilt had to be gathered. While the investigation was underway, Emily and Andrew wasted no time. They found an orphanage where, according to Jennifer, were to transfer her newborn daughter. Emily used her journalist's license to find out if the baby had actually been admitted here on certain days. It turned out that it had. The girl is still in the orphanage. She is already 2 months old, but Andrew and Emily were not shown the baby. It is not allowed. But they were offered a wonderful way out. Andrew needed to make a test to confirm paternity. DNA sample was planned to take in the girl, And if it turns out that they are relatives, then Andrew will be able to register his daughter on himself and take her home. The only downside was that the analysis itself was slow. We had to wait almost a month for the results. In the meantime, a new problem was discovered. When Andrew and Emily returned to their hometown, it turned out that Jennifer's parents are not allowed to see their grandchildren. Emily found the strength to visit her friend's mother, Aunt Cynthia. She thought to support her in some way. Andrew went with her then. The woman met them with tear-stained eyes. But of course it was no surprise. Her only daughter had died, and how, while everyone thought she had done it herself. Emily just silently hugged the woman tightly and tightly. Aunt Cynthia almost cried again, but by some miracle she held back, sighed, and even smiled as she invited the guests into the kitchen for tea. There, at the kitchen table, where Emily had sat many times as a child, Aunt Cynthia told of a new and unexpected trouble. "They won't let me have my children. They won't even let me see my grandchildren," she shook her head sadly. There was so much pain and despair in her eyes. "Who does not give?" Andrew asked. "Jason and Samuel. But it's not the same place. The initiator is Hannah." Jason's stepmother, Emma, had seen this cold, arrogant woman in her 50s several times. Emily was the only one who knew she'd wanted a child. She'd been in treatment for years, but it hadn't worked. And Hannah seemed very attached to Jennifer's children. There was nothing wrong with that. It's great when a grandmother loves her grandchildren and is willing to be involved with them. But Hannah's feelings were just too much, weren't they? Jennifer had once jokingly told Emily how Hannah had regretted aloud that she couldn't buy such babies. She would definitely buy the whole trio wholesale from her sister-in-law then. Jennifer had laughed then, and Emily had been uncomfortable with something in those words. And now it turned out that Hannah almost glad tragedy happened to the young daughter-in-law. After all, the children had become virtually her property. This Hannah initiated a ban on communication with their parents, afraid that they would take the children to themselves. She herself planned to raise the children on her own. Officially, the children were in Jason's custody, but he didn't really need them, so the kids were at Hannah's complete disposal. "She's turning them against us," Aunt Cynthia shook her head. "Ben's older. He's afraid of me already. I saw it 2 days ago. I went to their house out of desperation, but they wouldn't let me in. I stayed at the gate and waited for about an hour. Then the children went out to play in the garden. So cute, so nice. Ben is Jennifer's eldest son. He understands a lot already. The little one saw me through the fence and got scared. He grabbed the little ones by the arms and ran into the house. What did they tell them about us? How did they introduce us?" Andrew sat silent, clenching his fists. He held himself back from launching into an angry tirade to upset Jennifer's mother even more. Emily could see that he was seething with rage. A plan to help his friend's parents was already brewing in his head. Jason's father was a powerful man with connections everywhere. It probably wouldn't take much for him to get the court to stop Jennifer's parents from seeing their grandchildren. But if the case is publicized and a few high-profile stories are made, Emily can create a huge scandal in the press, sensationalize and resonate. Then Samuel will have a much harder time carrying out his devious plan. We just have to wait a little longer for the results of the investigation. Emily and Andrew hoped that Jason would be proven guilty. They had no doubt in their minds that the man had been involved in Jennifer's death. The only question was whether the investigators would be able to gather enough evidence to prove his guilt. After all, a lot of time had passed. The story brought Andrew and Emily closer together. They worked together as a team. Emily realized why her friend had fallen in love with this man. He was indeed very kind, sensitive, and yet strong, determined, confident, and intelligent. Sometimes they would talk, and the man's eyes would fill with tenderness and longing. It was obvious that he loved her and loved her very much. After these conversations, Emily every time thought about whether she would ever meet a man who would treat her like that. In parallel, the girl prepared materials for articles and reports about Jason, collected information about her friend's husband, talked to his former colleagues, acquaintances, subordinates. Many confirmed the man's abnormal cruelty. Jason was cold, calculating, aggressive. Once at one of his facilities worked inmates from the local colony cheap labor. They did difficult, dangerous work and got paid a pittance for it. It's a common scheme. And so one of these men was beaten very badly by an enraged Jason, unhappy with the results of his work. Emily was told about this by a man who had once been in charge of one of Jason's repair crews. "The prisoners came at my disposal. There were 6 of them. What can I say? Untrained men. They weren't much use, but they were as demanding as my professionals. One of them once refused to go into the pit. You could understand him. It was very dangerous, and that man saw it perfectly well. The walls could crumble. Jason overheard his objection by accident. He was just passing by, checking out the site. And it started. Jason first roughly ordered the man down. He stood his ground. I won't risk my life, that's all. Then the insults started. Jason called him all sorts of names he obviously didn't consider the convict a human being, and emphasized it in his rant. And then he lost his temper, the former construction foreman said quietly. It was as if someone had possessed him. He swooped down on the prisoner, knocked him to the ground, and started pounding his face, stomach, and back with his feet and fists. He was barely dragged away from the man. He was taken to the hospital and died there. Jason got away with it, and I and some of the other witnesses to the scene were quickly fired so we wouldn't talk too much. So there you go. Emily had already had enough material to report on Jason's mayhem. While the investigators were looking into his case, she was doing her own investigation with Andrew's help. It turned out that Jason was a really scary person. According to his mother, he was also unhealthy, a real monster. And that's the man Jennifer had to live with for 3 weeks. The days in this place flew by. The lab came back. Yes, Andrew was indeed the father of the newborn baby girl who had been dropped off at the orphanage. On a frosty December morning, Emily helped the man with the necessary paperwork. Together, they prepared a room for the baby girl and went to pick her up together. When Emily saw the girl for the first time, she couldn't help but sigh in surprise. The DNA test wasn't really necessary. She looked just like her father. Her eyes, on the other hand, were her mother's, as piercingly blue as Jennifer's. When Emily and Andrew and the tiny girl returned to their hometown of Minneapolis, they received startling news. Jason had been arrested. Cynthia's worried aunt told Emily. The woman sobbed into the phone. He's the one who ruined our little girl. I felt it. He's a monster. Jennifer didn't do it on her own. I know, Emily replied. I've always known it. Jason went to prison. The children were given to Jennifer's parents because their mother was no longer alive. Their father went to prison for many years. Hannah, who had dreamed so much of having the 3 children to herself, was essentially nothing to them, not even Samuel's grandmother. He didn't really try to fight for his grandchildren. He was too shaken by the news of his own son. The man had never realized he was raising a monster. Emily sat in the compartment by the window and looked at the forests and fields running past. She was on her way home to New York. A month's vacation had flown by. The vacation, if it could be called that, had been a busy one. She did so much, had so much time. It had been difficult, but the main thing was that everything had ended well as possible. Of course, at least justice was served in the end. Jason is in jail, proven guilty. Now everyone knows that Jennifer didn't step out on her own. Jennifer's children are with loving grandparents, and the youngest daughter, Amber, is with a caring father and sibling. They would be fine. Emily knew that for sure. Emily herself had made a very good friend, Andrew. A wonderful man, trustworthy, kind, intelligent. Emily promised that she would visit him and the babies. You bet she would, because Amber was her goddaughter. Jennifer would be very happy with that fact. What a horrible, twisted story. Could the monstrous sacrifice have been avoided? Could the danger that threatened Jennifer have been noticed in time to save her? Emily couldn't answer that question for herself. The sensationalized report Emily was preparing on Jason would never see the light of day, because now it was no longer necessary. It had been resolved without the scandal. In the press, Emily had a new idea. She's going to make a documentary about the attacks. That's where Jason and Jennifer's story could be woven in. These things need to be talked about out loud. Emily hoped her future movie would help girls and women avoid Jennifer's fate. If at least someone recognizes the monster in time and asks for help, if at least one of them escapes from the clutches of this kind, it will completely pay off the time and money spent on filming. By the way, the idea for the movie did not come to Emily on its own. The night before, she saw a strange dream. It was very unusual. Emily felt as if she was not asleep and is in some special space. It was a sun-drenched meadow. She felt the warmth of the golden rays on her shoulders and back. Her feet lightly stabbed the blades of grass. And then there was the scent. Emily could smell the sun-warmed wormwood and mint. The sensation was surprisingly realistic. Suddenly, a frail figure appeared on the horizon. It slowly approached, and soon Emily recognized Jennifer. Yes, it was Jennifer. She was smiling, but her eyes were sad. Emily wanted to run up to her, to hug her, but she gestured for her friend to stop. They talked a lot then, reminiscing about their childhood, laughing, joking as if nothing had ever happened. And then Jennifer was suddenly in a hurry, quickly thanking Emily for everything she'd done for her and her children. Tears glistened in her eyes. And then Jennifer also told Emily that she could save hundreds or even thousands of victims like her, victims of their own husbands. Make a movie about us. Jennifer smiled. It's for us. What are you talking about? Explain more. But the next second Emily found herself lying in her room. Dawn was breaking outside the window. The woman stayed in bed for a while, going over the details of the strange dream in her head. And then she turned on the light, took out her diary, and began to sketch the plan of the future movie.